Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. My name is Caleb Merce, and I worked as a park ranger in the National Forest in Washington State for most of the past 8 years. If you haven't been to the Pacific Northwest, it's hard to explain what the rainforests are really like. Most people imagine trees and think they understand, but Olympic Peninsula is different. The trees here aren't just tall, they're also incredibly old. Western hemlock and Sitka spruce trees tower over 200 feet in the constant fog. Their trunks wider than most living rooms, their root systems so vast and interconnected that you're walking on a living web stretching for miles in every direction. The rain is constant from October through May. Not the kind of rain that comes and goes, but a persistent drizzle that seems to hang in the air itself, turning everything damp and green and alive. Moss grows on every surface, turning the forest floor into a carpet of emerald and jade. The air smells like cedar and decay, rich and loamy, the scent of things growing and dying in the same breath. And the silence, God. The silence between the rain is so complete it feels like the forest is holding its breath, waiting for something. I'm telling you all this because you need to understand the place to understand what happened. The Olympic National Forest isn't like other parks. It's not a place you visit to take selfies at scenic overlooks. It's 922,000 acres of true wilderness, much of it old-growth, temperate rainforest that's been standing since before Columbus set sail. It's a place where people go missing. Not often, but regularly enough that we kept detailed records, cross-referenced with weather patterns, seasonal variations, and known problem areas. Maya Terrell had been my partner for 3 years when this happened. She was Forest Service through and through. Born and raised in Port Angeles, the daughter of a logger who'd worked the peninsula before the old growth protections came in. Maya knew these woods better than anyone I'd ever met. She could read the forest the way other people read books, seeing signs and patterns that were invisible to everyone else. We'd worked dozens of search and rescue operations together, and I'd learned to trust her instincts completely. It was early March when we got the call. Late afternoon, maybe 4:30, the light already fading into that gray twilight that passes for evening in the rainforest during winter. I was finishing up paperwork at the ranger station in Quilcene when the radio crackled to life. Quilcene Station, this is dispatch. We've got a possible missing hiker situation. Female, early 20s, overdue from a day hike on the Dos Wallops Trail. Reporting party is her boyfriend. Says she was supposed to be back by 3 p.m. I glanced at the clock. It was 4:45. Not terribly late, but late enough to be concerning with darkness coming on fast. Copy that, dispatch. What's our timeline? Boyfriend says she left the trailhead at 9 this morning. Plan to do the upper Dos Wallops loop. Estimated return time 3 p.m. He's been waiting at the trailhead since 2:30. Says it's not like her to be late. I made a note. The upper Dos Wallops was a moderate trail. Popular enough to be well maintained, but remote enough that you wouldn't see many other hikers this time of year. About 12 miles round trip, gaining roughly 3,000 feet in elevation. Not particularly dangerous in good weather, but the forecast had called for rain, and rain in March at altitude could mean snow. Have we tried her cell? Boyfriend tried multiple times, goes straight to voicemail. No signal up there, you know how it is. I did know. Cell coverage in the Olympic National Forest was spotty at best, non-existent in most of the backcountry. It was one of the things that made search and rescue operations so challenging out here. All right, I'll head to the trailhead and assess. Can you get Maya on the radio? I want her on this one. Already ahead of you. She's en route from Lake Cushman. ETA 20 minutes. I grabbed my pack, already loaded with emergency gear from the last call-out, and headed for my truck. The rain had picked up, not heavy but steady, the kind that would soak you through in minutes. I radioed dispatch back as I drove north on Highway 101. "What's the missing hiker's name?" "Sarah Vance. 23 years old, 5'6", brown hair, last seen wearing a blue rain jacket and gray hiking pants. Experienced hiker according to the boyfriend." The Dos Wallops Road was in rough shape, potholed and partially washed out from winter storms, and it took me almost 40 minutes to reach the trailhead. Maya's truck was already there when I arrived, parked next to a newer model Subaru. She was standing under the covered information board with a young man who looked like he was trying very hard not to panic. "Caleb, this is Derek Martin," Maya said as I approached. "Derek, this is Ranger Mercer. We're going to find your girlfriend." I shook Derek's hand, noting the firm grip, the slightly wild look in his eyes. He was dressed appropriately for the weather, good boots, rain gear, but his hands were shaking. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, pulling out my notebook. Derek ran a hand through his wet hair. "Sarah and I drove up from Seattle this morning. We've done this trail before, back in the summer. She wanted to do it again, said she loved it in the rain. I had work calls this afternoon, so I was going to wait at the car, but she said she'd be fine solo. She's done plenty of hiking by herself." "What time did she start?" 9:15. I watched her head up the trail. She was in a good mood, excited. She had plenty of water, snacks, first aid kit, the works. Sarah's not stupid about this stuff. "And when did you start getting worried?" 3:30. She said she'd be back by 3 at the latest. I tried calling at 3:15, no answer. Tried again every 10 minutes. By 4, I knew something was wrong. Sarah's compulsive about time. If she says 3, she means 3. Maya caught my eye. We were both thinking the same thing. 4:45 was late, but not catastrophically late. People misjudge trail times all the time. But something in Derek's certainty made me take his concerns seriously. "Any medical conditions we should know about? Medications she needs?" "No, nothing. She's healthy, runs marathons. This trail shouldn't have been a problem for her." I looked up at the mountain, obscured now by low clouds and rain. The temperature was dropping. If Sarah was injured and couldn't move, hypothermia would become a real concern in a matter of hours. "Okay," I said. "Here's what we're going to do. Maya and I are going to head up the trail now. We've got lights, radios, emergency gear. Derek, I need you to stay here at the trailhead. If Sarah comes back on her own, she needs to find someone here. Can you do that?" He nodded, looking miserable. "Keep your car running with the heat on. If you haven't heard from us in 2 hours, I want you to drive back to cell coverage and call dispatch. They have our coordinates. Don't come looking for us. Understood?" "Understood." Maya and I geared up quickly. Headlamps, GPS units, radios, emergency bivy sacks, extra food and water. I carried the med kit. Maya carried extra rope and the satellite beacon in case we needed to call for helicopter evacuation, assuming the weather cleared enough for flight. "What do you think?" I asked as we started up the trail. Maya was quiet for a moment, her headlamp beam cutting through the growing darkness. "Trail's in decent shape. No obvious hazards. If she stayed on the path, she should have been fine. But the rain's washed out some of the trail markers. Easy to take a wrong turn if you're not paying attention. And the river's high. If she tried to cross anywhere off the main bridges..." She didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what swollen rivers could do. We made good time on the lower section of the trail, calling Sarah's name every few minutes, listening for a response. The forest swallowed our voices. In summer, these woods would be alive with birdsong. But in March, in the rain, the only sounds were water dripping from branches and our boots on the muddy trail. About 40 minutes in, maybe 3 miles from the trailhead, Maya stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" I froze, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but rain. Then I heard it, faint and distant, a voice calling. Not words, just a sound. A cry for help, maybe, or just a shout. "Sarah!" Maya called. "Sarah Vance!" We waited. Nothing. "It came from up ahead," Maya said. "Off trail, east side." We moved faster now, following the main trail but listening intently. Every 50 yards or so we'd stop and call out, straining to hear a response. The forest seemed to press in around us, the massive trees creating a canopy that blocked what little light remained. Our headlamps created moving pools of illumination in a sea of darkness. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. Someone calling out. But something was wrong. The voice wasn't calling for help, it was calling a name. My name. "Caleb." I stopped so fast Maya almost ran into me. "What's wrong? Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I stood absolutely still, rain running down my face. Had I imagined it? The forest played tricks on you. Echoes and wind through the trees could sound like voices. But I could have sworn I heard someone call my name. "Thought I heard something," I said, not wanting to sound crazy. "Let's keep moving." We continued up the trail, climbing steadily now as the path switchbacked up the mountainside. The vegetation changed as we gained elevation, the massive Sitka spruce giving way to smaller hemlock and Douglas fir. The understory thinned out, making it easier to see into the forest on either side of the trail. That's when I saw the footprint. It was just off the trail, maybe 15 feet into the trees. A single boot print in the mud, clear and fresh, the tread pattern still sharp. I motioned for Maya and we approached carefully. "That's recent," Maya said, crouching down to examine it. "Within the last few hours. Size 7, maybe 8, could be Sarah." I swept my headlamp in a slow circle, looking for more tracks. That's when I noticed something strange. The footprint pointed into the forest away from the trail, but there was no second print. No continuation of the track, just one boot print, crisp and clear in the mud, and then nothing. "That doesn't make sense," I said. Maya was already standing up, shining her light in the direction the print was facing. Maybe she stepped on a rock for the next step, or a log. We spread out, searching the area carefully, but there were no more tracks, no disturbed vegetation, no broken branches, just that single footprint, pointing deeper into the forest. "Sarah!" I called out. "Sarah Vance, can you hear me?" The forest answered with silence and rain. Maya pulled out her GPS. "We're at about 3.2 miles from the trailhead. Elevation, 4,800 feet. If she went off trail here, she could be heading toward Dos Wallops Falls. There's old game trails through this section." "Or she could be lost," I said, turned around and wandering. Only one way to find out. We marked the spot with a bright orange ribbon tied to a nearby tree, noting the GPS coordinates. Then we left the main trail and headed into the forest in the direction the footprint indicated. This was harder going. The forest floor was uneven, covered in fallen logs and thick with ferns and salal. We had to climb over deadfall, duck under low branches, constantly scanning for any sign of passage. The rain intensified, coming down harder now, and visibility dropped to just a few feet beyond our headlamp beams. We'd been off trail for maybe 10 minutes when I heard it again. "Caleb." This time, there was no mistaking it. A voice, clear and distinct, calling my name from somewhere ahead of us in the darkness. "Who's there?" I called back. Maya grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" "Someone just called my name. You had to have heard that." She looked at me strangely. "Caleb, I didn't hear anything." "It was right there. Someone said my name." Maybe it was Sarah. Maybe she... Sarah! I shouted. Sarah Vance, if you can hear me, call out. We waited. The rain pattered on the leaves. Water dripped from the branches. But no voice answered. I'm telling you, someone called my name, I insisted. Maya's expression was careful. The look she got when she was trying not to alarm me. The forest does weird things with sound, especially in the rain. Echoes, wind, water on rocks. It can sound like voices. I know what I heard. Okay, she said gently. Okay, let's keep looking. We continued deeper into the forest, moving slowly, calling for Sarah every few minutes. The terrain was getting rougher, sloping downward now toward what I knew was a steep ravine. If Sarah had come this way in the dark, injured or disoriented, she could have fallen. That's when we found the second footprint. It was identical to the first. Same boot, same size, same fresh tread pattern in the mud. But this one was at least 200 yards from the first print, and once again there was no trail leading to it. No other prints before or after. Just a single boot impression in the soft ground, pointing further into the forest. This isn't right, Maya said quietly. I was thinking the same thing. You can't walk through a muddy forest and leave only single, isolated footprints. There should be a trail, a path, some indication of movement from point A to point B. Maybe she was stepping on logs, I suggested, trying not to leave tracks. Why would she do that? I had no answer. We marked this print too, noted the GPS coordinates. I pulled up the mapping app on my GPS unit and marked both locations. The two prints formed a line pointing almost due east, straight toward the Dos Wallops River Canyon. If she keeps going this direction, she's heading for a cliff drop, Maya said. 200-foot drop to the river. My stomach tightened. How far? Maybe quarter mile. We needed to move faster. I radioed back to Derek at the trailhead, told him we'd found possible tracks and were investigating. The radio crackled badly, the forest and rain interfering with the signal, but I got through. Then we pushed forward, abandoning caution for speed. If Sarah was heading toward a cliff in the dark, we might already be too late. The forest changed as we went deeper. The trees grew more twisted, their branches hung with long curtains of moss that dripped constantly. The undergrowth became denser, forcing us to push through thickets of salmonberry and devil's club. My rain jacket caught on thorns, ripping in several places. Maya's face was scratched from low branches. And then I heard it again. Not my name this time, but a different sound. Laughter. Faint and distant, like a child laughing somewhere in the darkness. Did you hear that? I asked. Hear what? That laugh, someone laughing. Maya stopped, listening intently. I don't hear anything, Caleb. But I could hear it, clear as anything. A woman's laugh echoing through the trees. Then, impossibly, I heard my name again. Caleb, come find me, Caleb. I started to run. Caleb, wait! Maya shouted behind me, but I couldn't stop. Someone was out there calling for me, and I had to find them, had to help. I crashed through the undergrowth, my headlamp bouncing crazily, throwing shadows that seemed to move and writhe. The laughter continued, always just ahead of me, drawing me forward. Branches whipped at my face. My boots slipped on wet rocks. I stumbled, caught myself, kept running. Caleb, stop! Maya's voice behind me, growing fainter. And then, suddenly the ground disappeared. I had just enough time to realize I'd run off the edge of something before Maya's hand clamped onto my pack and yanked me backward. We both went down hard, landing in a tangle on the muddy ground. What the hell are you doing? Maya demanded, her voice shaking. I scrambled to my knees and looked forward. My headlamp illuminated empty space, We were at the edge of the cliff, the one Maya had warned about. Another step, and I would have gone over. I heard, I started to say, then stopped. What had I heard? The laughter was gone. The voice calling my name was silent. There was only the rain and the sound of the river far below. "You heard what?" Maya asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I heard someone. I thought I heard Sarah." Maya helped me to my feet. We stood at the edge of the precipice, shining our lights down. The cliff dropped away into darkness, too far to see the bottom. The sound of rushing water echoed up from below. "We need to rope up if we're going to search down there," Maya said. But I was looking at something else. There, right at the edge of the cliff, was another footprint. The same boot, the same size. This one was different, though. It was right at the very edge, the toe of the boot hanging over empty space, as if someone had stood there, balanced on the brink, looking down into the void. "Maya," I said quietly, "look at this." She saw it too. We both stood there in the rain, staring at that impossible footprint, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "That's not Sarah," Maya said finally. "That can't be Sarah. No one would stand that close to the edge, not on purpose, not in the dark." I had to agree. The footprint was positioned in a way that defied logic. Someone standing like that with their weight forward should have fallen. There was no way to maintain balance in that position. "We need to call this in," I said. "This isn't a normal search and rescue anymore." Maya pulled out the satellite phone. It took 3 tries to get a signal strong enough to connect with dispatch. When she finally got through, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice as she tried to explain what we'd found. While she talked, I kept my light on that footprint at the cliff's edge, and I tried very hard not to think about the voice I'd heard, calling my name, leading me straight toward the drop. Tried very hard not to wonder what would have happened if Maya hadn't caught me in time. Dispatch wanted us to hold position until first light. Maya argued that we should continue the search, but I knew she was right when she said we couldn't safely navigate the cliffs in the dark, not without more gear and more personnel. We compromised. We'd spend the night at our current location, keeping watch, listening for any signs of Sarah. A full search and rescue team would join us at dawn. We set up a minimal camp about 50 yards back from the cliff edge, finding a relatively flat spot beneath a massive old-growth hemlock whose thick branches provided some shelter from the rain. Maya strung up a tarp to keep our sleeping bags dry while I set up the portable stove to heat water for instant coffee. "You want to talk about what happened back there?" Maya asked as we sat beneath the tarp, sipping terrible instant coffee that tasted like heaven in the cold. "I heard something," I said. "I know I did. I believe you heard something. The question is what?" I looked out into the darkness beyond our small circle of light. The forest at night was a different world. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't. Trees creaked and groaned in the wind. And sometimes, if you listened carefully, you could hear things that didn't quite make sense. "When I was a kid," I said, "my grandfather used to tell me stories about the woods in Oregon where he grew up. He said the old loggers had a superstition. They believed the forest could call to you, that if you heard your name in the trees, you shouldn't answer. You shouldn't follow. Your grandfather was trying to keep you from wandering off and getting lost." Maybe, but he was serious about it. He said he'd heard it himself once, when he was working a salvage operation after a big storm. Heard his name clear as day, coming from deep in the slash piles of downed timber. He turned around and went back to camp. 3 days later, they found another logger dead in that same area. The man had been crushed under a widowmaker, a hung-up branch that fell on him. Maya was quiet for a moment. "You think the forest called to that logger?" "I think maybe the forest calls to people who are about to die." Or maybe people who are dying call to others without meaning to. I don't know. I'm just saying, there are things in these woods we don't understand. You sound like old Jim Terrell, Maya said with a slight smile. My grandfather. He had all kinds of superstitions about the peninsula. Wouldn't work certain sections of forest. Said they had bad spirits. Did he ever say what happened in those places? She shrugged. Loggers disappeared, equipment malfunctioned, men went crazy. The usual tall tales. But the thing is, the old-timers all took it seriously. They'd avoid certain valleys, certain groves of trees. And you know what? The accident rate was lower in areas they stayed away from. Correlation doesn't equal causation. No, but it makes you think. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. I checked my watch, 9:45 p.m. Derek would be frantic by now, but there was nothing we could do until morning. Either Sarah would turn up on her own, or we'd mount a full-scale search with proper equipment and a full team. Around 11 p.m., Maya took first watch while I tried to get some sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the forest and tried not to think about that voice calling my name. Tried not to think about those impossible footprints, appearing out of nowhere, leading toward a cliff edge. I must have dozed off because I woke with a start to Maya shaking my shoulder. Caleb, wake up. I sat up fast, instantly alert. What is it? Listen. I held my breath and listened. At first I heard nothing unusual. Rain, wind, the distant rush of the river. Then I heard it. Music. Faint and far away, barely audible over the ambient noise of the forest, someone was playing music. It sounded like a guitar, or maybe a ukulele, the notes simple and repetitive. A melody I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. Where's it coming from? I whispered. I can't tell. It seems to move. One moment it's to the north, the next it's to the east. We both stood up, straining to pinpoint the source of the sound. The music continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. We waited, but it didn't return. Sarah could play guitar, I said, remembering something Derek had mentioned. He said she used to bring it camping. Did she have one with her today? I thought back to Derek's description of Sarah's gear. Day pack, water, snacks, first aid kit. No mention of a guitar. I don't think so. Then who? The music started again, closer this time. Definitely a stringed instrument, playing the same simple melody. This time I recognized it. You Are My Sunshine, that old song everyone knows. But there was something off about it. The tempo was too slow, the notes almost dragging, like a music box winding down. Hello? Maya called out. If someone's out there, please respond. We're park rangers. We can help you. The music stopped. We should check it out, I said, reaching for my boots. Maya grabbed my arm. No, we should not. We're staying put until dawn, remember? We don't know what's out there. It could be Sarah. She could be hurt, disoriented, trying to signal us. With a guitar she doesn't have? Playing children's songs in the middle of the night? Caleb, think about this. She was right, of course. Nothing about this made sense. But what were we supposed to do? Sit here and wait while someone potentially in need was out there in the dark? The decision was made for us when my radio crackled to life. Quilcene Station. This is Ranger Harris at the trailhead. Do you copy? Harris. I felt a flash of irritation. Ranger David Harris had transferred to our station 6 months ago from California, and we'd clashed from the start. He was arrogant, dismissive of local knowledge, and had a tendency to showboat on search and rescue operations. This is Mercer. I copy. What's your situation, Harris? I'm at the Dos Wallops trailhead with the boyfriend, Derek Martin. Dispatch sent me to coordinate. What's your status? I filled him in on what we'd found: the footprints, the cliff edge, the decision to hold until morning. I didn't mention the voice or the music. I wasn't ready for Harris's skepticism. "Acknowledged," Harris said. "I'm heading up to your location now with additional gear and a K9 unit. ETA approximately 2 hours. "Negative," I said. "We specifically decided to hold for daylight. The trail's unsafe at night in these conditions." "That's your decision, Mercer. I'm making a different call. We've got a missing hiker who's been gone 12 hours now. Every minute counts." Maya reached for the radio. "Harris, this is Terrell. Ranger Mercer is correct. The trail is unstable, visibility is near zero, and we've already nearly had one accident. Stand down and wait for dawn." There was a pause. Then Harris's voice came back, tight with barely controlled annoyance. "Noted, Ranger Terrell, but I'm already on the trail with the K9 handler. We'll see you shortly." Maya swore under her breath. That idiot is going to get himself killed. Maybe we should head back down, meet him halfway, and leave our search grid unattended? No. He wants to be a hero. Let him. We'll maintain our position. But I could see she was worried. Harris was reckless, but he was still one of ours. If something happened to him because we didn't intervene... The music started again. This time it was much closer, maybe 50 yards away, coming from the direction of the cliff. The same melody, "You Are My Sunshine," but now I could hear something else underneath it. A voice, humming along. A woman's voice. "Sarah?" I called out. "Sarah Vance, is that you?" The humming stopped. The music continued for a few more notes. Then it too fell silent. Maya had her flashlight out, sweeping the area where the sound had come from. "I see something. There, look." I followed her light. About 40 yards away, just visible in the rain and darkness, something pale was hanging from a tree branch. It swayed slightly in the wind. We approached carefully, our hands near our weapons. As we got closer, I could make out what it was. A backpack. A blue backpack, soaked through and muddy, hanging from a broken branch about 7 feet off the ground. "That's not right," Maya said. "That's way too high. Nobody hangs a pack that high." I shined my light up into the tree. There were no other branches within easy reach. No way someone could have climbed up there without a ladder or climbing gear. Yet there it was, dangling like it had been tossed up there with considerable force. "Maybe an animal?" I suggested. "Bear could have grabbed it, dragged it up. Black bears don't climb that high with packs. And why would they? There's no food smell. Look at it, it's not torn. A bear would have shredded it." She was right. The pack was intact, just dirty and wet. Maya pulled out a collapsible pole from her gear, extended it, and hooked the pack's strap. It took several tries, but she eventually managed to knock it free. It fell to the ground with a wet thump. Inside, we found a wallet with Sarah Vance's ID, a half-empty water bottle, an energy bar, and a first aid kit. Also in the pack, a small digital camera and a phone in a waterproof case. The phone was dead, but the camera still had battery. Maya turned it on and scrolled through the photos. Most were landscape shots. The trail, the trees, close-ups of mushrooms and lichen. Then we got to the last photos taken, time-stamped at 2:47 p.m. The first photo was a selfie of Sarah, smiling, rain on her face. The forest blurred in the background. The second photo was of the trail ahead of her, the path disappearing into the trees. The third photo was strange. It was completely black except for a small area in the center that was slightly lighter, showing what might have been trees or rocks or nothing at all, like the camera had been in a pocket or bag when the shutter clicked accidentally. But the fourth photo, the last one, made my blood run cold. It was another selfie, but this time Sarah wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of pure terror, her mouth open in what might have been a scream, her eyes wide and fixed on something behind the camera. The timestamp read 2:51 p.m., 4 minutes after the happy selfie. "What the hell happened to her in 4 minutes?" Maya whispered. I looked at the photo more carefully. Behind Sarah, barely visible in the background, was something pale. A shape among the trees. At first I thought it was just fog or a trick of the light, but the more I looked at it, the more it resembled a human figure. Tall and thin, standing perfectly still among the trunks. "Look at this," I said, showing Maya. She enlarged the image, trying to get a better look at the figure. But the camera's resolution wasn't good enough. It remained an ambiguous blur, hovering between definitely human and definitely not. "We need to get this to dispatch," Maya said. "They can enhance it. See if there's..." Her radio crackled. "Terrell, this is Harris. I'm approximately 1 mile from the trailhead, moving towards your coordinates. The K9 just picked up a scent. We're following it now." "What kind of scent?" Maya asked. "Handler says it's fresh, human, moving fast." "Which direction?" "East, toward the river." "Toward the cliff." "Harris, be advised we're near a significant drop-off. Watch your step and maintain constant communication." "Copy that. Handler's confident, though. Dog's got a strong track." I looked at Maya. "That doesn't make sense. We've been out here for hours. If Sarah passed through this area recently enough for a dog to track, we would have seen her. Unless she circled back somehow, or she's been moving parallel to us." It was possible, I supposed. The forest was vast. In the dark and rain, you could pass within 50 feet of someone and never know they were there. "Let's head toward Harris's position," I said. "If the dog has a real track, we should coordinate the search." We packed up our minimal camp quickly, marked our location with GPS, and started moving north toward where Harris said he was. The terrain was rough, forcing us to navigate around fallen logs and thick brush. Every few minutes we'd stop and call for Sarah, listening for any response. That's when we heard the scream. It came from ahead of us, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the night like a knife. Then it cut off abruptly, ending in a way that made me think of a door slamming shut. "Harris!" Maya shouted into her radio. "Was that you?" "Harris, respond." Static. "Harris, this is Terrell, come in." More static, then a burst of sound that might have been a voice but was too distorted to understand. We ran. The forest became a blur of motion and darkness. My lungs burned. Branches whipped at my face. Maya was right beside me, both of us crashing through the undergrowth with all the speed we could manage. "Harris, where are you? Can't see. Something in the... Wrong. It's all wrong." The radio kept cutting in and out, Harris's voice fragmented and desperate. Then silence. We burst into a small clearing and stopped short. Harris was there, on his knees in the mud, his flashlight lying a few feet away, throwing crazy shadows. The K9 handler, a woman I didn't recognize, was standing rigid beside him, her dog cowering at her feet. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing over. Harris looked up at me. His face was white, his eyes unfocused. "It was right there," he said. "Right there in the trees, looking at us." What was right there? I don't know. It was tall, so tall, and it was watching us. The K9 handler spoke up, her voice shaky. "The dog just froze. I've never seen him do that. He started tracking, then just stopped and started whining. Then that scream. That wasn't us," Harris interrupted. "We heard it too. It came from over there." He pointed toward the darkness beyond the clearing. Maya swept her flashlight in that direction. For a moment, I thought I saw something move, a shifting in the shadows that might have been a person. Then it was gone. "Everyone, stay calm," Maya said in her most authoritative voice. "Harris, can you walk?" He nodded, getting to his feet. He seemed shaken, but physically okay. "All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to group together, maintain visual contact at all times, and move back toward the main trail, slowly and carefully. No one goes off alone for any reason." "But Sarah," Harris started. "Sarah's either going to be found in daylight by a full team, or she's already dead. Either way, getting ourselves killed isn't going to help her. We regroup, we call for helicopter support as soon as it's light enough, and we do this properly." I'd never heard Maya sound so certain, so commanding. Whatever she'd seen or not seen in those shadows had convinced her this search needed to end. Now, we formed a tight group and started walking. The K9, normally a confident German shepherd, stayed pressed against the handler's legs, refusing to take point. We moved in silence except for the sound of rain and our boots in the mud. That's when we found the bag. It was sitting in the middle of the trail, maybe 200 yards from where we'd left Harris. Not hanging from a tree this time, just sitting there upright, as if someone had carefully placed it moments before. The same blue backpack we'd found earlier. "That's impossible," I said. "We have Sarah's pack, I looked at Maya. She was holding Sarah's pack in her hand. I looked back at the pack on the trail. Identical. Same color, same style, same wear patterns. Harris approached it slowly. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Don't touch it," Maya warned. But Harris was already kneeling down, reaching for the zipper. He opened it and looked inside. Then he jerked backward so fast he fell on his ass, scrambling away from the pack. "What?" I asked. "What is it?" "Look for yourself." I approached carefully and shined my light into the open pack. It was full of mud, fresh, wet mud, packed tight. And sitting on top of the mud, arranged carefully, were items. Sarah's wallet, Sarah's water bottle, Sarah's energy bar and first aid kit, Sarah's camera and phone, exact duplicates of what we'd found in the first pack. But that wasn't the worst part. Underneath the items, barely visible in the mud, was something else. Something pale and curved. I reached in carefully and pulled it out, my hand shaking. It was a rib bone. Human, I thought. Or at least it looked human, except it was too long, the curve too extreme. Like something had stretched it. Maya grabbed my shoulder. "We're leaving, now. We can't just, now, Caleb." There was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Real fear. Maya Terrell, who'd worked these woods her entire life, who'd faced down bears and rescued people from avalanches, was scared. We walked fast, almost running, heading back toward the main trail. The forest seemed to close in around us. Our flashlight beams caught movement everywhere. Shadows that shouldn't move, shapes that might have been trees, or might have been something else. Behind us, I heard it one more time. "Caleb," my name, called in a voice that sounded like Sarah Vance, based on the photos I'd seen. But with an echo underneath, like two voices speaking as one. I didn't turn around. I kept walking. We made it back to the main trail just as the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees. The rain had stopped. The forest looked almost normal in the growing light, just trees and ferns and moss, beautiful and peaceful. We didn't speak until we reached the trailhead. Derek was still there, asleep in his car. We woke him gently and told him we hadn't found Sarah, but that a full search team would be arriving soon. What we didn't tell him was that we had no intention of going back into those woods. Not ever. The official search for Sarah Vance lasted 5 days. 50 volunteers, 3 dog teams, a helicopter when the weather cleared. They found nothing. No body, no additional evidence, no trace of where she might have gone after that last terrified selfie at 2:51 p.m. The backpack we found, both backpacks actually, were sent to the state crime lab. The bones turned out to be deer ribs, the lab reported, though they noted some unusual morphological features they couldn't explain. The mud in the second pack was just mud. The duplicate items were exactly that, duplicates down to the serial numbers on the electronics. The official explanation was that Sarah had packed 2 of everything, a not uncommon practice among experienced hikers. The backpacks being identical was written off as bulk purchasing. The fact that we'd found one hanging 7 feet up in a tree was attributed to animal activity, despite Maya's objections. The impossible footprints were explained as erosion patterns that resembled boot treads. Derek Martin hired a private investigator. The PI spent 2 weeks on the peninsula, interviewing locals, researching the history of the Dosawallips area. He found what locals could have told him for free. People disappeared in these woods. Not often, but regularly. 1 or 2 a year, going back decades. Some were found eventually, dead from exposure or falls, but others simply vanished, leaving behind strange evidence that never quite added up. The PI's report mentioned something else. An old legend among the Skokomish people, the native tribe whose traditional lands included much of the Olympic Peninsula. They spoke of the trail people, spirits who lived in the deepest parts of the forest and sometimes called to the living. The accounts varied, but most agreed on one thing. If you heard your name in the forest, you shouldn't answer. You shouldn't look. And you definitely shouldn't follow. Harris requested a transfer 2 weeks after the search ended. He's working in Arizona now, somewhere dry and open where you can see for miles. He never talked about what he saw that night, and I never asked. Maya and I both considered quitting. We talked about it over beers at the Mill Tavern in Port Angeles, going through our options, weighing the pension we'd lose against the peace of mind we'd gain. In the end, we stayed. These were our woods, our responsibility. But we changed how we worked them. We never took solo patrols anymore. We always worked in pairs, always stayed in radio contact. We avoided certain areas, especially after dark, and if we heard our names called in the forest, we ignored it. 3 months after Sarah disappeared, I was doing paperwork in the ranger station when I got a call from a hiker who'd found something strange on the upper Dosawallips trail. I drove out with Maya, both of us tense as we approached the location. The hiker led us to a spot about 4 miles up the trail, not far from where we'd found Sarah's first footprint. Sitting on a flat rock, perfectly dry despite the morning rain, was Sarah's camera. The same camera that was supposedly in evidence lockup in Olympia. I called to verify. The evidence clerk confirmed they still had Sarah's camera logged and secured. Serial number match and everything. So either there were 3 cameras, or something had returned this one. Maya wanted to leave it. I almost agreed, but in the end, my training won out. I photographed it in place, bagged it as evidence, and took it back to the station. That night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't resist. I took the camera out of the evidence bag and turned it on. The battery was fully charged. There were new photos. The first was dated 4 days after Sarah disappeared. It showed the forest, the same old-growth trees, the same trail we'd searched. But there was something in the distance, a figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing among the trees. The second photo was closer to the figure. I could make out details now. Pale skin, long limbs, a face that was almost human, but not quite. The proportions were wrong. Everything was stretched, elongated like someone had taken a person and pulled them upward until they barely resembled what they'd been. The third photo was a selfie. Sarah Vance smiled at the camera. Behind her, the tall figure stood with what might have been a hand on her shoulder. Sarah's expression was serene, almost happy. But her eyes were wrong. They were too large. The pupils dilated until they were almost entirely black. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., March 24th. 2 days ago. I deleted the photos. I know I shouldn't have. I know it was destroying evidence. But some things aren't meant to be seen. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. I put the camera back in the evidence bag, filled out a report stating it contained no new information, and sent it to Olympia to join the other one. Maya called me that night. She'd been talking to her grandfather, the old logger, the one who believed in the superstitions. "He told me something," she said, "about the trail people. He said they take someone every few years, someone who hears the call and follows it. And those people, they don't exactly die. They become part of the forest, part of whatever those things are. That's just a story, Maya." "Is it?" "We saw those footprints, Caleb. Single prints, no trail. Like someone was walking without touching the ground. We saw that backpack 7 feet up in a tree. We heard that voice calling your name. How do you explain that?" I couldn't. I still can't. My grandfather said there's a reason the old loggers avoided certain areas. They learned, over generations, which parts of the forest were wrong. They passed that knowledge down. But we don't listen anymore. We think we know better. We map every square mile, we put trails through sacred groves, we bring thousands of people into places that should be left alone. So, what are you saying? I'm saying maybe the forest is taking back what's hers, and maybe we should let her. The next day, Maya put in for a transfer. She's working up in North Cascades now, another wilderness area, but one she didn't grow up with, one that doesn't have the same hold on her. I stayed. Someone had to. Someone who knew. 6 months later, I was training a new ranger, fresh out of Colorado, eager and confident. We were doing a routine trail check on the doe swallops when he stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "Someone called my name." I grabbed his arm. "No, they didn't. It was the wind. Just the wind. But I heard, you didn't hear anything. We're heading back to the station, now." He argued, but I pulled rank. We returned to the trailhead, and I gave him the talk that no training manual includes. I told him about the things that live in the deep woods, about the voices that call, about the people who disappear. I told him about Sarah Vance. He listened, his expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and finally a kind of wary acceptance. When I finished, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you really believe all that?" I thought about those footprints, the backpack in the tree, the photos on the camera, the voice that had called my name, leading me toward a cliff edge in the dark. "It doesn't matter what I believe," I said. "What matters is that you understand the rules. If you hear your name in these woods, you don't answer. You don't investigate. You turn around and you walk away. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly. Yeah, I can do that." "Good. Because the forest is beautiful, and it's worth protecting. But it's not ours. We're just visitors here. And some places, some deep, wild places, they belong to something else. Something that was here long before us, and will be here long after we're gone." We drove back to the station in silence. That night, I wrote a letter to the Forest Service Administration recommending certain areas of the Olympic National Forest be designated as high-risk zones, with restricted access. I knew they'd never approve it. There'd be questions about liability, about public access rights, about economic impact on tourism. But I had to try. Because somewhere in those woods, Sarah Vance is still walking, still moving through the trees with those impossible footprints, spacing out in a pattern that defies logic. And she's not alone. There are others going back decades, maybe centuries, all of them called by voices they couldn't resist, all of them following trails that led to places the maps don't show. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about that moment at the cliff edge, the moment I heard my name and started running, drawn by a voice that sounded so real, so human. The moment before Maya grabbed my pack and pulled me back from the drop. In my dreams, she doesn't catch me. In my dreams, I keep running, over the edge and into the dark. But I don't fall. I step out onto nothing and keep walking, my feet finding purchase on empty air. I walk down the cliff face like it's level ground, down toward the river, toward the deep forest beyond. And in those dreams, I'm happy, peaceful, like I finally found the place I was always meant to be. Then I wake up, and I'm in my apartment in Quilcene, and the rain is pattering on the windows, and I'm still human, still alive. Still here, but I wonder, sometimes, I wonder if part of me is still out there walking in the rain, following that voice deeper and deeper into the trees. I wonder if the version of me that woke up in this apartment is the real one, or just an echo, a footprint left behind. I wonder if one day I'll get a call about a hiker who found something strange on the Dos Wallops Trail. A ranger's badge, maybe, or a radio, or a camera full of photos that shouldn't exist. And I wonder if that hiker will hear a voice calling their name from the trees. If they do, I hope they remember what I'm writing now. I hope they remember Sarah Vance and all the others who followed the voices and never came back. I hope they turn around and walk away. Because the forest is patient, the forest is hungry, and the forest is always calling. Always. Last week, Derek Martin called me. He's moved to Seattle, trying to move on with his life. He wanted to know if there had been any developments in Sarah's case. I told him no, which was technically true. The official case was closed, filed as a missing person with no leads. But then he asked me something that made my blood run cold. "Do you ever hear from her?" he asked. Because I do, sometimes, late at night. I hear her voice calling my name, and I know it's crazy, but I swear it's coming from the woods. From up there, in the mountains. I told him it was grief. Trauma. Suggested he talk to a therapist. He agreed, thanked me for my time, and hung up. But I know what I heard in his voice. He wasn't asking for reassurance. He was asking for permission. Permission to go look. To follow that voice back into the forest where it all began. I thought about calling him back, warning him, telling him in explicit terms that he should never, ever go back to the Dos Wallops Trail. But I didn't, because some people need to learn for themselves. Some people need to follow the voices, to find their own answers. And some people are already lost, even when they think they're safe in the city, far from the trees. Derek Martin will go back to those woods. Maybe not today, maybe not this year. But eventually, the call will be too strong to resist. He'll drive up Highway 101, turn onto the Dos Wallops Road, park at the trailhead. He'll start walking, and somewhere around mile 3 he'll hear her voice. "Derek, I'm here. Come find me." And he'll follow, just like Sarah followed. Just like I almost followed. Just like someday maybe you'll follow. Because that's the thing about the forest. It's patient, it can wait, it has all the time in the world, and it's always hungry. I'm writing this down now, documenting it as clearly as I can, because I think I'm running out of time. The dreams are getting stronger, more frequent. I wake up with mud on my boots that I can't explain. I find moss growing in my apartment, in corners where moss shouldn't be able to grow. Yesterday, I looked in the mirror, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, my reflection was wrong. Too tall, too thin. The proportions stretched in ways that human bodies don't stretch. Maya was right to leave. Harris was right to transfer. I should have gone with them. But I stayed because someone had to watch. Someone had to warn people. Someone had to stand at the boundary between the world we understand and the world that exists in the deep places, the wild places, the old-growth forests where the rules are different. I'm that someone, for now, but I can feel it calling, every night when I close my eyes, every time I drive past the trailhead, every time I hear rain on the trees. My name carried on the wind. Caleb, Caleb, come home, Caleb. And I know that one night I'm going to answer. I'm going to get in my truck and drive to the Dos Wallops trailhead. I'm going to start walking, and somewhere around mile 3 I'm going to hear my name called one more time. And this time there won't be anyone there to grab my pack and pull me back. This time I'm going to keep walking, into the rain, into the trees, into whatever waits there in the dark, patient and hungry and very, very old. If you're reading this, if I've left this document where it can be found, then I'm already gone. Don't look for me. Don't follow. Don't listen to the voices if they call your name. Just turn around, walk away, and whatever you do, don't look back. The forest is beautiful, but some places in the forest aren't meant for us. Some places belong to the trail people. And some trails, once you start walking them, never really end. My name is Rowan Dillard, and I've spent the last 11 years working as a ranger in the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. If you've never been to the western side of the Cascades, it's difficult to explain just how wet it is here. We average over 90 inches of rain a year, sometimes more. The forest doesn't just get wet, it stays wet. Everything is covered in moss. Ferns grow from tree branches, and the air itself feels heavy with moisture, like breathing through a damp cloth. The trees here are massive. Douglas fir and western hemlock that have been growing for 3, 4, sometimes 500 years. Their trunks are so thick it would take 5 or 6 people holding hands to encircle them. The canopy is so dense that even on clear days, very little direct sunlight reaches the forest floor, and when the fog rolls in, which it does for about 8 months of the year, you can barely see 20 feet in front of you. I'm telling you this because the environment matters. The forest matters. When you're working in a place like this, you develop a relationship with it. You learn its moods, its patterns, its dangers, and after 11 years, I thought I knew Mount Hood National Forest as well as anyone could. I was wrong. Jonas Herrick transferred to our station in late September, coming down from the Gifford Pinchot National Forest in Washington. He was in his mid-40s, quiet, competent, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his life outdoors. He'd been with the Forest Service for almost 20 years, mostly in wilderness areas, and his resume was impressive. Search and rescue certifications, wilderness first responder, even some training with the FBI on evidence preservation in remote locations. We needed someone like Jonas. Our station was chronically understaffed, and the fall hiking season was picking up. The weather was still decent enough that people were attempting the higher elevation trails, but unpredictable enough that we were running search and rescue operations almost weekly. Jonas's first assignment was routine maintenance on the Mirror Lake Trail, one of our most popular routes. It's a relatively easy 4-mile round trip that takes hikers to a pristine alpine lake with stunning views of Mount Hood on clear days. The trail sees thousands of visitors every year, which means it requires constant upkeep, clearing fallen branches, maintaining drainage to prevent erosion, and most importantly, keeping the trail markers visible and accurate. Trail markers are crucial in an environment like this. When the fog rolls in, which it can do without warning even in summer, hikers can easily lose the trail. We use a combination of wooden signs at major junctions, painted blazes on trees, and small cairns in areas above the tree line. Each marker is carefully placed, and regularly maintained. Lives depend on them. Jonas headed out on a Tuesday morning with a cleanup kit: brushes, paint, cleaning solution, replacement signs. Standard procedure was to walk the entire trail, document the condition of each marker, clean off any moss or debris, touch up faded paint, and replace damaged signs. It should have taken him most of the day. He radioed in at noon from Mirror Lake, reporting that the trail was in decent condition but that several of the wooden signs had accumulated more moss than usual. He said he was cleaning them off and would head back down within the hour. When he returned to the station that afternoon, he seemed troubled. "Something weird with the signs," he said, dropping his pack on the floor of the ranger station. I looked up from my paperwork. "Weird how?" "The moss. It's thick, really thick, like years of growth thick. But we're supposed to maintain this trail every 2 months, right?" "That's the schedule, yeah. Last maintenance was," I checked the logbook, "early August. So about 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks shouldn't produce that kind of moss growth. I'm talking about moss so thick I had to scrape it off in chunks, and it was covering the lettering on the signs completely. Like you couldn't read them at all." I frowned. Rain's been heavy this month, and we did have those warm spells in early September. Warm plus wet can accelerate growth. Maybe. Jonas didn't sound convinced. But there's something else. When I was cleaning off the sign at the main junction, the one that points toward Mirror Lake and Tom, Dick, and Harry Mountain, I found something underneath the moss. "Found what?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was the junction sign, a standard wooden Forest Service marker with routed letters painted white. But in the photo, barely visible under a layer of moss, there appeared to be additional text. Letters carved or painted below the official designation. I zoomed in on the image. The letters were crude, uneven, like someone had scratched them with a knife or a sharp rock. They spelled out a single word: wrong. "What the hell is that?" I muttered. "I don't know. Vandalism, maybe?" But it was completely covered by moss. I only found it because I was scraping really deep to get to the original paint. "Did you photograph it before cleaning?" "Yeah, got several shots. But here's the thing, Rowan, that moss was adhered, like really adhered, not fresh growth you could brush off. It took me 20 minutes with a wire brush to clear that sign." I studied the photo more carefully. The moss did look unusually thick, forming almost a solid mat over the wood. And the word wrong was disturbing, though I couldn't quite say why. Vandalism happened. Bored teenagers, angry locals, sometimes even hikers who disagreed with Forest Service policies. But this felt different. "You report it to maintenance?" I asked. "Not yet. Wanted to show you first. Should I file a vandalism report?" I thought about it. "Yeah, go ahead. Include the photos. But don't make a big deal about it. Could just be some asshole with too much time on their hands." Jonas nodded, but he still looked uneasy. "There's one more thing. When I was heading back down, I ran into a couple coming up the trail. They said they'd tried to hike to Mirror Lake 2 days ago, but turned back because they couldn't find the trail. Said the markers disappeared once they got past the first mile. The markers were there today, though, right? Every single one. I documented them all." I made a note to check the trail myself in the next few days, but I wasn't overly concerned. Hikers got lost all the time, even on well-marked trails. Fog, distraction, poor map reading skills, there were a dozen explanations. But 2 days later, we got a call that changed everything. A woman named Patricia Reeves had been reported missing. She'd told her husband she was going for a short hike on the Mirror Lake Trail Tuesday afternoon, the same day Jonas had cleaned the markers. She was an experienced hiker, had done the trail multiple times before, and had only planned to be gone a few hours. When she didn't return by dark, her husband called it in. I took the call myself. "What time did she leave?" "Around 2 p.m., her husband said. His voice was tight with controlled panic. "She was just going to the lake and back. 4 miles total. She should have been home by 5 at the latest." "Is her car still at the trailhead?" "Yes. I'm there now. Her car's here, but there's no sign of her." I looked at the clock. 7:15 p.m. Patricia had been missing for at least 5 hours, and it was nearly full dark. "I'm heading there now with a search team. Stay at the trailhead. If she comes back, call me immediately." Jonas and I grabbed our packs and headed out, picking up 2 other rangers, Sarah Kim and Marcus Lewis, on the way. By the time we reached the Mirror Lake trailhead, it was full dark and starting to rain. Patricia's husband, Michael, was pacing by his car, a flashlight in his hand. He looked like he was barely holding it together. "She knows this trail," he kept saying. "She's done it a dozen times. She wouldn't get lost." "Sometimes people take a wrong turn," I said gently, "especially if the weather changed or if she was distracted. We're going to find her." We split into 2 teams. Jonas and Marcus would search the main trail, while Sarah and I would check the side trails and alternate routes. We all carried radios, GPS units, extra batteries for our headlamps, and emergency gear. The forest at night is a different world. Our headlamp beams created small pools of light in an ocean of darkness. Rain dripped from the trees, creating a constant pattering sound that made it hard to hear anything else. We called Patricia's name every few minutes, listening for a response. An hour into the search, Jonas radioed in. "We're at the main junction. The sign's covered in moss again." I stopped walking. "What do you mean, again? You just cleaned it 2 days ago." "I know, but it's covered. Thick moss just like before. I can barely read the letters." That didn't make sense. Moss didn't grow that fast. It couldn't. "Are you sure it's the same sign?" "Positive. I marked it." His voice crackled over the radio. "Rowan, this isn't right. This is impossible." Sarah looked at me, her expression questioning. I shook my head slightly. "Keep searching," I said into the radio. "We'll worry about the signs later." But I was worried. Not about the moss. There had to be a rational explanation for that, even if I couldn't think of one at the moment. What worried me was that Patricia had hiked this trail in the afternoon, when there was still plenty of light, and somehow hadn't made it back. We searched until 2 a.m., covering every established trail and several of the unofficial paths that branched off into the deeper woods. We found nothing. No sign of Patricia, no dropped items, no footprints that couldn't be attributed to other hikers. At 2:15, I called off the search until morning. We were exhausted, wet, and searching in the dark was becoming dangerous for the searchers themselves. We'd resume at first light with a larger team and possibly a helicopter if the weather cleared. Back at the trailhead, I had to give Michael Reeves the news that we hadn't found his wife. He took it hard, but he was trying to stay strong. "She's out there," he said. "She has to be. She wouldn't just disappear." But that's exactly what it looked like. She had disappeared. At 6 a.m., we assembled a search team of 20 people. Rangers, volunteer search and rescue personnel, and a K-9 unit. The rain had stopped, but thick fog had rolled in, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet. I assigned teams to search in a grid pattern, covering not just the Mirror Lake Trail, but all the surrounding area. The dogs would focus on the main trail, trying to pick up Patricia's scent. Jonas pulled me aside before we headed out. "I went back to that junction sign this morning, before everyone got here, and the moss is thicker, and I found more words." He showed me a new photo on his phone. The sign was almost completely obscured by moss now, but he'd scraped away enough to reveal more crude lettering beneath. Wrong way, turn back. They changed the paths. I stared at the image. Jonas, this doesn't make sense. You cleaned this sign 2 days ago. Moss can't grow this fast. I know it can't, but it did. He looked at me seriously. And Rowan, I think Patricia might have seen these signs. I think she might have tried to follow them. Follow them where? They're telling people to go back. Exactly. What if she saw a sign that said wrong way and thought she'd taken a wrong turn? What if she backtracked and then took a different path thinking it was the correct one? It was a disturbing thought. Trail markers were supposed to guide people to safety, not lead them astray. If someone had deliberately vandalized the signs to confuse hikers, we need to check every marker on every trail in this area, I said. Document everything. If someone's tampering with signs, that's a federal crime, and we need evidence. The search continued through the morning. The K9 unit picked up Patricia's scent on the main trail, followed it up to the junction where Jonas had found the vandalized sign, and then lost it. The handler said it was like Patricia had simply vanished at that spot. Could she have been picked up by someone? The handler suggested. If she got into a vehicle, that would explain why the scent trail ends. There's no vehicle access up here, I pointed out. The trailhead's the closest you can drive. Then I don't know what to tell you. The dog's trained and experienced. If he loses a scent like this, it usually means the person either got into water or into a vehicle. Is there water nearby? There was a small creek about 100 yards east of the junction, but it was barely 6 inches deep. Hardly enough to throw off a tracking dog. We expanded the search throughout the day, bringing in additional volunteers and resources. News vans showed up at the trailhead. Patricia's face appeared on the evening news. Her husband made a tearful plea for information. But we found nothing. On the 3rd day, I hiked the Mirror Lake Trail alone, carefully examining every sign, every marker, every blaze. What I found disturbed me deeply. The markers were wrong. Not all of them, but enough. Small discrepancies that would be easy to miss unless you knew the trail intimately. A painted blaze that pointed slightly the wrong direction. A cairn that had been rebuilt to mark a game trail instead of the main path. And the wooden signs, every single wooden sign was covered in thick moss, the kind of growth that should take months or years, not days. I photographed everything, documented the GPS coordinates, and scraped moss from the signs. Underneath, on every sign, I found the same crude messages. Wrong, wrong way, turn back. They change the paths. Don't trust the markers. The handwriting was different on each sign. Different tools had been used. Some looked carved, others scratched. A few appeared to be written in something dark that might have been paint or might have been something else. And the dates. When I looked closely at the moss, at the way it had grown over the carved letters, I realized these messages weren't recent. Some of them looked years old, the letters worn and weathered. But that meant previous maintenance crews should have found them, should have reported them. Unless the moss was covering them until recently. That evening, I called a meeting with Jonas and our station chief, Robert Keller. I showed them the photos, explained what I'd found. I want every trail in this district checked, I said. Every marker, every sign. And I want to know if any other hikers have reported getting lost in areas where they shouldn't have. Robert pulled up incident reports on his computer. His face grew pale as he scrolled through them. Jesus, he muttered. Look at this. In the past 3 months, we've had 18 reports of hikers getting lost or disoriented on trails they claim to know well. 15 of those reports came from the Mirror Lake Trail, or the trails immediately adjacent to it. 18? I leaned over his shoulder. We usually get maybe 3 or 4 a year. I know. And look at this. Most of them mention the trail markers being wrong or misleading. Here, this one from August. The signs seem to point in different directions than I remembered. This one from September. I could have sworn the blaze markers were in different spots than last time I hiked here. Jonas spoke up quietly. What if someone is changing the markers? Moving them, altering them, covering them with moss to hide what they're doing? Who would do that? Robert asked. And why? I thought about the messages under the moss. They changed the paths. Maybe it's not one person. Maybe it's been happening for years. Different people for different reasons. Vandals, people with grudges against the Forest Service, who knows? Or, Jonas said slowly, maybe someone's trying to warn us. We both looked at him. Those messages, he continued, they're not just vandalism. They're warnings. Don't trust the markers. They change the paths. What if someone knows something we don't? What if someone's been watching the trails change and trying to warn people? It was a disturbing thought, and it raised an even more disturbing question. If someone was trying to warn people about the changing trails, what were they being warned about? Tomorrow, Robert said, I want a complete audit of every trail marker within White miles of Mirror Lake. Photo documentation, GPS coordinates, condition reports, and I want to know who was responsible for maintenance on these trails over the past 5 years. We worked through the night, pulling maintenance logs, comparing them against incident reports, trying to find a pattern. What we found was inconsistent. Some trails had been maintained on schedule. Others had gone months without inspection despite being marked as completed in the logs. Equipment had been signed out but never returned. And in 3 cases, rangers who had been assigned to trail maintenance had requested transfers shortly afterward, citing personal reasons. One of those rangers was still with the Forest Service, working at a station in eastern Oregon. I called him at 8 a.m., waking him up. This is Ranger Dillard from Mount Hood. I'm calling about the Mirror Lake Trail. You did maintenance there in 2019, correct? There was a long pause. Who told you that? It's in the logs. You signed out trail maintenance equipment on June 15, 2019, and were assigned to Mirror Lake and the surrounding trails. Another pause. I don't remember. You requested a transfer 2 weeks later. I need to know why. Personal reasons. I need specifics. We have a missing hiker and evidence of trail marker tampering. If you know something. I don't know anything. His voice was tight. And I don't want to talk about Mirror Lake. Ever. Goodbye, Ranger Dillard. He hung up. I tried calling back. He didn't answer. I looked at Jonas, who had been listening. That was not the reaction of someone with personal reasons for transferring. No, Jonas agreed. That was the reaction of someone who's scared. On the 4th day of searching for Patricia Reeves, we found something. A boot, just one, a women's hiking boot, sitting in the middle of the trail about a 1/4 mile past the Mirror Lake Junction. It was Patricia's size, Patricia's brand. It had been placed carefully, almost ceremonially, with the toe pointing back toward the trailhead. There was no sign of a struggle. No blood, no torn fabric, no indication that the boot had been forcibly removed. It simply sat there, as if Patricia had taken it off and left it behind. Inside the boot was a piece of paper, damp but still legible. On it, in handwriting that Patricia's husband later confirmed was hers, were 2 words, markers wrong. The discovery of Patricia's boot changed the nature of the search. This was no longer a simple case of a lost hiker. Something had happened to her, something that had made her remove her boot, leave a message, and then continue on, presumably with only one boot on. The FBI got involved. They took the boot and the note into evidence, sent them to a lab for analysis. They interviewed Michael Reeves extensively, checked Patricia's background, her phone records, her financial history. They were looking for any indication that this might be a voluntary disappearance, that Patricia had staged her own vanishing for reasons unknown. But everyone who knew Patricia said the same thing. She was happy, stable, had no reason to disappear. She loved her husband, enjoyed her job as a teacher, had no financial problems or legal troubles. She was exactly what she appeared to be, an ordinary woman who enjoyed hiking and had somehow vanished into the forest. The media coverage intensified. "Missing teacher's boot found on trail," read one headline. "Mysterious message deepens Oregon hiking mystery," read another. Reporters camped out at the trailhead, interviewing other hikers, filming stand-ups with Mount Hood in the background. And then the other hikers started coming forward. A man named David Ortiz called the tip line to report that he'd hiked the Mirror Lake Trail 3 weeks earlier and had gotten completely turned around, despite having done the trail multiple times before. He said the markers seemed wrong, that he'd ended up on a side trail he didn't recognize, and had to backtrack for over an hour to find his way out. A woman named Jennifer Ling reported a similar experience from early September. She said she'd followed the trail markers carefully but had somehow ended up at a completely different lake, one that wasn't on her map. When she tried to retrace her steps, she couldn't find the same trail again. A teenage boy said he'd found a trail marker that was painted on the wrong side of a tree, facing away from the trail. When he walked around the tree to look at it properly, he saw that someone had scratched words into the bark below the marker. "The forest moves." The reports were eerily consistent. People were following the established markers and ending up in the wrong places, and more of them were mentioning the moss, thick, fast-growing moss that covered signs and seemed to appear overnight. Jonas and I spent a week systematically checking every trail marker in the district. We documented over 40 instances of markers that were either wrong or suspicious. Blazes that pointed in slightly incorrect directions. Cairns that had been rebuilt to mark game trails. Signs with crude warnings carved underneath layers of moss. But here's what really bothered me. When we checked the same markers a day later, some of them had changed again. A blaze we'd photographed pointing north would be pointing northeast the next day. A cairn we'd documented would be in a slightly different position, or rebuilt with different rocks. The moss would be thicker or thinner, or in a different pattern. "Someone is actively changing these markers," Jonas said, as we stood in front of a sign that I could have sworn had been in a different position yesterday. "Someone is out here, in the forest, moving things around. But why? What's the point? I don't know. But I think we should set up cameras, trail cams, see if we can catch whoever's doing this." We got approval to install motion-activated cameras at key locations along the Mirror Lake Trail and its offshoots. We disguised them as best we could, mounting them high in trees, camouflaging them with bark and moss. Within 3 days, we got our first footage. The camera was positioned to watch the main junction sign, the one where Jonas had found the first vandalism. The timestamp showed it was 3 a.m., pitch dark except for the camera's infrared illumination. At 3:14 a.m., something moved in the frame. It was hard to see at first. The infrared gave everything a ghostly, washed-out quality. But there was definitely movement, something approaching the sign. Then a figure stepped into view. It was a person. Or at least it was person-shaped. They were wearing what looked like old, dirty hiking clothes, and they moved with a strange shambling gait. Their face was turned away from the camera, hidden. We watched as the figure approached the sign, reached up, and began pulling at something. After a moment, we realized they were adding moss to the sign. Taking handfuls of moss from a bag they carried and pressing it onto the wood, carefully covering the lettering. The process took about 10 minutes. When they were done, the sign was completely obscured, The figure stepped back, looked at their work, and then did something that made my skin crawl. They turned toward the camera, looked directly at it. The infrared washed out most of their features, but I could see enough. It was a woman, middle-aged, with long hair that hung in wet tangles around her face. Her eyes reflected the infrared light, glowing white in the darkness. She stared at the camera for a long moment. Then she smiled and walked away into the forest. "Jesus Christ," Jonas breathed. "Did you see?" "Yeah." I rewound the footage, paused it on the moment when she looked at the camera. "Can you tell who that is?" He studied the frozen frame. "No, the infrared distorts everything. But I can tell you one thing. She knew the camera was there. She looked right at it." We reviewed footage from the other cameras. 3 of them had captured the same figure. Or figures. It was hard to tell if it was the same person or different people. They appeared at different times of night, always between 2 and 4 a.m. Sometimes they added moss to signs. Sometimes they moved cairns. Sometimes they just stood in front of markers, staring at them before walking away. The FBI wanted copies of all the footage. They ran it through facial recognition, tried to enhance the images, attempted to identify the clothing or any distinctive features. Nothing came back. The quality was too poor, the infrared too distorting. But they did notice something we'd missed. In the footage from one camera, positioned near a trail junction half a mile from Mirror Lake, the figure walked directly toward the camera, close enough that individual features should have been visible. But the closer they got, the more distorted the image became. Like there was interference, or like the infrared was bouncing off them in strange ways. When the FBI tech tried to enhance that section of footage, the file corrupted. Every time. 4 different attempts. 4 corrupted files. "Equipment malfunction," the tech said, but he didn't sound convinced. We increased patrols on the trails, especially at night. Rangers would walk the Mirror Lake Trail in pairs, armed with flashlights and radios, trying to catch whoever was tampering with the markers. We never saw anyone, but the changes continued. Markers moved, moss appeared overnight, and the messages under the moss multiplied. They changed the paths. "The forest moves. Don't trust your eyes. We are still here. Turn back before it's too late." That last one bothered me the most. We are still here. Who was we? And what did they mean by still here? Jonas found part of the answer in the Forest Service archives. He'd been digging through old incident reports, going back decades, looking for any pattern that might explain what was happening. What he found was a file from 1987, marked "Confidential, Internal Use Only." The file documented a series of disappearances on the Mirror Lake Trail over a 3-month period. 5 hikers had vanished, all experienced, all on clear days, all on a trail they'd hiked before. Search efforts had been extensive, but had found nothing. No bodies, no belongings, no signs of what had happened. The official conclusion was that the hikers had somehow wandered off trail and succumbed to the elements, though this explanation satisfied no one. But there were notes in the file, handwritten observations from the lead investigator, that had never been made public. Trail markers appear to be in flux. Rangers report having to re-establish markers multiple times per week, finding them moved or altered overnight. Local indigenous sources suggest area has history of paths that move, though this is obviously folkloric rather than factual. Recommend increased maintenance and possibly relocating trail to different area. The recommendation had never been acted upon. The trail had remained where it was, and according to Jonas's research, there had been at least 15 unexplained disappearances on or near the Mirror Lake Trail since 1987. 15 people. Gone. Why didn't anyone connect these? Jonas asked, spreading the files across the conference table. 15 disappearances over 37 years, all on the same trail? Because they weren't all on the same trail, Robert Keller said, looking through the reports. Look, this one was on the Tom, Dick, and Harry Trail. This one was on Cairn Basin. They're all in the same general area, but different trails, and spread out over decades. No one would think to connect them. But we are now, I said. We're connecting them, and the connection is the trail markers. Every one of these cases mentions something about the markers being wrong or confusing. Robert looked at me seriously. What are you suggesting, Rowan? That the forest is somehow... What, moving the trails? That's not possible. I'm not suggesting anything supernatural, but I am saying that someone, or multiple someones, have been systematically altering trail markers in this area for at least 37 years. And people who trust those markers end up disappearing. Then we need to find who's doing it and stop them. But how do you stop someone you can't catch? Someone who knew the forest well enough to evade patrols, avoid cameras, and vanish without a trace. We tried everything, more cameras, night vision equipment, even brought in thermal imaging drones, though the thick canopy made them largely useless. We caught glimpses, occasional shadows, movement that might have been people or might have been animals or might have been nothing at all. And still, the markers changed. I started having nightmares. In them, I would be hiking the Mirror Lake Trail, following the markers carefully. But every time I looked at a sign, it would say something different. Turn right, turn left, go back, continue forward. The letters would rearrange themselves while I watched, forming new words, new directions. And in the dreams, I would follow the markers anyway. Deeper into the forest, away from the trail, into places where the trees grew so thick that no light penetrated, where the ground became soft and uncertain beneath my feet. I would wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, convinced for a moment that I was still in the forest, still lost. Jonas wasn't sleeping well either. He'd become obsessed with the case, spending his off hours reviewing footage, analyzing moss growth patterns, trying to find some logical explanation for what was happening. I keep thinking about what Patricia wrote, he said one evening, as we reviewed yet another night's worth of useless camera footage. Markers wrong. Not markers are wrong, just markers wrong. Like she was in a hurry, like she figured it out too late. Figured what out? That following the markers was the worst thing she could do. Look at all these disappearances. Every single person trusted the trail markers. They followed the established route, and that's what got them lost. So, what should they have done? I don't know. Ignored the markers? Used their own navigation? But that doesn't make sense either. The whole point of trail markers is to keep people safe. Unless the trail markers were deliberately designed to do the opposite. It was a dark thought, one I didn't want to entertain. But it kept coming back. What if the markers weren't being vandalized? What if they were being corrected? I thought about the messages under the moss. Wrong. Wrong way. They changed the paths. What if those weren't vandalism? What if they were warnings carved by people who'd figured out that the official markers couldn't be trusted? Jonas, I said slowly, what if we've been looking at this backwards? What do you mean? What if the Forest Service markers are the problem? What if someone's been using them to deliberately lead people astray? He stared at me. That's insane. Why would anyone at the Forest Service want to lead hikers into danger? Maybe not the Forest Service officially, but someone with access. Someone who could alter markers as part of their job. Someone who knows these trails intimately. A ranger? His voice was skeptical. You think one of us has been doing this for 37 years? Not one person. Multiple people. Over the years. Rangers who transferred here worked for a while and then left. Look, I pulled up the personnel files. In the past 37 years, we've had 43 different rangers assigned to this district. Average tenure is less than 3 years. That's unusually high turnover for a popular posting like Mount Hood. People transfer for lots of reasons. Sure. But what if some of them transferred because they discovered what was happening? Or what if some of them were part of it? It sounded paranoid even as I said it. But the evidence was there, the altered markers, the disappearances, the high turnover rate, the ranger who'd hung up on me when I asked about his time here. We need to talk to more of them, Jonas said. The ones who transferred, find out what they know. We started making calls. Out of the 43 former rangers, we were able to contact 27. Most were happy to reminisce about their time at Mount Hood. A few were guarded but polite. 3 hung up immediately when we mentioned Mirror Lake. 2 more requested we not contact them again. And 1, a woman named Rebecca Torres who'd worked here in the late 90s, agreed to meet with us in person. She lived in Portland now, about an hour and a half from the station. We drove down on a Saturday morning and met her at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. Rebecca was in her early 60s, fit and tan, with the look of someone who still spent a lot of time outdoors. But when we sat down and I mentioned the Mirror Lake Trail, she went pale. I was wondering when someone would finally ask about this, she said quietly. Ask about what? The moving trails, the changing markers, the people who disappear. She looked at both of us seriously. How many have gone missing this year? One that we know of, Patricia Reeves. One that you know of. But there are more, aren't there? People who went hiking and never came back, but their families don't report it because they're embarrassed or angry or whatever. People who live alone, who no one misses right away. Drifters. How many, really? I didn't have an answer to that. When I worked Mount Hood, Rebecca continued, I started noticing the patterns. Hikers who got lost on trails they knew. Markers that would be in one place one day and somewhere else the next. I thought I was going crazy at first, but then I found the messages. The ones carved under the moss. Those and others. Scratched into rocks. Written on the backs of official signs. Hidden all over the forest. All saying the same things. The trails move. The markers lie. Don't trust what you see. Did you report it? She laughed bitterly. Of course I reported it. Filed detailed incident reports. Documented everything with photos. Sent it all up the chain. You know what happened? Nothing. My reports were lost. My supervisor told me I was stressed, suggested I take some time off. When I insisted, they started the paperwork to have me evaluated for fitness for duty. They tried to say you were mentally unstable. They tried to say I was seeing things that weren't there. Imagining patterns that didn't exist. They wanted me to see a counselor, submit to a psych evaluation. So I stopped reporting it, started keeping my own records instead, and when I'd documented enough, when I was sure I wasn't crazy, I requested a transfer and got the hell out. Jonas leaned forward. What do you think is happening? Who's changing the markers? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but I can tell you what I think. I think the forest itself rejects certain trails. I think we built paths through places that shouldn't have paths, and something is pushing back, moving the markers, changing the routes, leading people away from where they're trying to go. That's not possible, I said. Isn't it? Look at the growth rates. Look at how fast the moss appears. Look at how trees fall across certain sections of trail but never others. Look at the erosion patterns, how certain paths wash away, no matter how much maintenance you do. The forest is alive, Ranger Dillard. It grows. It changes. And maybe, in some places, it has ways of protecting itself. You're talking about the forest like it's conscious. I'm talking about the forest like it's an ecosystem that responds to intrusion. We humans like to think we're in charge, that we can put trails wherever we want, and nature will just accept it. But what if we're wrong? What if there are places that fight back in ways we don't understand? It sounded like mystical nonsense, but I couldn't deny the evidence. The trail markers did change. The moss did grow impossibly fast, and people did disappear. "Did you ever see anyone changing the markers?" Jonas asked. "No, but I felt watched constantly, especially at night, like there were eyes on me from the darkness. And just once I saw something that I still can't explain." "What?" "I was doing a night patrol. This was December, snowing, no moon. I was checking the Mirror Lake Trail, making sure the winter closure signs were in place. And I saw footprints. Fresh footprints in the snow, barefoot prints, human-sized. They came from deep in the forest, crossed the trail, and went back into the trees on the other side." "Barefoot in December?" "In a snowstorm. I followed them for a while, trying to figure out who would be out there without shoes in those conditions. The prints led me about half a mile off trail, into an area where there's no established path, and then they just stopped. Middle of a clearing, no trees nearby, nothing. Just the footprints ending, like whoever made them had been lifted straight up into the air." She paused, looking at her coffee. "I ran back to my truck and didn't stop until I was out of the forest. Put in my transfer request the next day." We talked for another hour, but Rebecca didn't have much more to offer. Just her observations, her fears, and her certainty that something was deeply wrong with the Mirror Lake Trail and the surrounding area. As we were leaving, she grabbed my arm. "Be careful, Ranger Dillard. Whatever's out there, it's patient. It's been at this for decades at least, probably longer, and it's very, very good at making people disappear." On the drive back, Jonas and I were silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Do you believe her?" "I believe she experienced something that scared her enough to give up a career she loved. I believe the evidence supports at least some of what she's saying. The rest is impossible. Yeah. But impossible things seem to be happening anyway. The search for Patricia Reeves was officially suspended after 2 weeks. The FBI closed their investigation, concluding that she had most likely gotten lost, wandered off trail, and succumbed to exposure in an area too remote to be found. It was the same conclusion they'd reached for the other disappearances, and it satisfied no one. But I couldn't let it go. None of us could. Jonas and I continued to monitor the trail cameras, document the changing markers, and try to find some pattern that would explain what was happening. We also started looking into the history of the area, going back beyond Forest Service records to the original inhabitants. The Mirror Lake area had been Molalla and Kalapuya territory before European settlement. I reached out to the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, explained what we were researching, and asked if they had any oral histories or traditions related to the area. A tribal elder named Thomas Weaver agreed to speak with us. We met at the tribal offices in Grand Ronde, about 2 hours northwest of Mount Hood. Thomas was in his 80s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested a lifetime spent outdoors. He listened patiently as I explained the disappearances, the changing markers, the messages we'd found. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "My grandfather told me stories about that mountain," he finally said. "About certain places where the paths don't stay still. Places where the forest remembers." "Remembers what?" "The old ways. Before the roads and the trails and the people who think they can go wherever they want. The forest remembers when it was whole, when paths formed naturally along the routes the animals took, the routes the water made, the routes the spirits walked. I tried to keep an open mind, but it was difficult. With respect, Mr. Weaver, I'm trying to understand what's happening from a practical perspective. People are disappearing. Trail markers are being altered. Is there anything in your traditions that might help explain the physical evidence we're finding?" He smiled slightly. "You want a rational explanation for something that isn't rational. I understand. But sometimes, Ranger Dillard, the world doesn't work the way we think it does." He stood up, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out an old folder. Inside were photocopies of hand-drawn maps, documents in what looked like a mix of English and tribal language, and several photographs. "In 1923, Thomas said, the Forest Service tried to establish a trail system through what you now call the Mirror Lake area. My grandfather was hired as a guide to help them navigate the terrain. He told them the area was unsuitable for permanent trails. He said the paths moved, that the forest didn't want people there." He showed us one of the maps. It depicted the Mirror Lake area, but the trails drawn on it didn't match the current trail system. They followed completely different routes. "They didn't listen to him," Thomas continued. "Built the trails anyway, using the routes they thought made sense according to their topographic maps. Within 3 months, loggers working in the area reported that the trails had changed. Markers moved. New paths appeared where none had been cut. The official explanation was vandalism, but my grandfather knew better. What did he think was happening? He thought the forest was correcting the mistakes. The trails the Forest Service cut weren't the natural paths. They went through areas that should have been left alone, crossed streams at the wrong points, disturbed places that had been undisturbed for thousands of years. And the forest, in its way, was trying to fix it." Jonas spoke up. "But how? How would a forest move trails?" Thomas shrugged. "Trees fall in particular places. Erosion happens faster in some areas than others. Moss and vegetation grow to obscure certain paths while leaving others clear. Animals create new trails that people start following. Over time, the human-made trails disappear and the natural routes reassert themselves." It was the most rational explanation I'd heard yet. Not mystical, just ecological. The forest is a system pushing back against roots that didn't fit its natural patterns. "But that doesn't explain the markers being moved overnight," I said. "Or the moss growing in days instead of months." "No," Thomas agreed. "It doesn't explain those things. For those, you'd need to look at who lives in the forest. Who lives there? People who don't want to be found, people who've made the forest their home, hermits, fugitives, those who've rejected the world outside. They've been there for generations, living in ways the modern world has forgotten, and they know the forest in ways you never will." "You're saying there are people living in the forest? Deliberately sabotaging trail markers?" "I'm saying there are people who understand that the trails are wrong. People who remember the old paths. And yes, I think some of them try to correct the mistakes however they can." He pulled out one of the photographs. It showed a group of people standing in front of a cabin, dated 1947. Most were Native American, but there were a few white faces as well. "After World War II," Thomas explained, "some soldiers came back and couldn't adjust to civilian life. Some of them ended up in the forests, living off the grid. A few made contact with my grandfather's people, learned to live the old ways. Some had children out there. Those children are old now, but some of them might still be in the forest, and their children after them. Wouldn't we have encountered them? Wouldn't hikers report seeing them? How many unexplained sightings do you get? People who see someone on a trail who doesn't quite look right, who disappears before they can be approached. How many reports of mysterious camps or smoke where there shouldn't be fire, or sounds that don't match any known animal?" I thought about the incident reports I'd read. There were dozens of such reports every year. We usually dismiss them as misidentifications, overactive imaginations, or ordinary explanations mistaken for something unusual. But what if some of them were real? If these people exist, Jonas said, why haven't we found evidence of them? Camps, shelters, supplies. Because they don't want to be found. And because you don't know where to look. The forest is bigger than you think, Ranger Herrick. Deeper than your maps show. There are places your trails don't reach. Valleys your surveys missed. Caves and hollows that don't appear in any database. A person who knows the forest could live there for years without ever being seen. It was a disturbing thought. The idea that there were people living in the forest we thought we knew, people who could observe us while remaining invisible. What about the disappearances? I asked. Do you think these forest people are they hurting the hikers who go missing? Thomas's expression darkened. I don't know. I'd like to think they're just trying to preserve their way of life, to keep people away from their territory. But people desperate enough to live in the wilderness for generations might do desperate things, especially if they believe the hikers are trespassing on sacred ground. Do you know where they are? Where they live? No. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you. These people have chosen their path. They have their reasons. It's not for me to betray them. We talked for another hour, but Thomas didn't have much more concrete information to share. Just stories, theories, and the certainty that there was more happening in the forest than the Forest Service understood. As we were leaving, he gave me a warning. If you're going to keep investigating this, Ranger Dillard, remember one thing. The forest takes care of its own. If there are people out there who've been protecting the forest for generations, they won't take kindly to outsiders trying to expose them. Be very careful how you proceed. On the way back, Jonas and I debated what to do with this information. We should organize a proper search, Jonas said. Not for Patricia, but for signs of habitation. If there are people living deep in the forest, we need to know about it. And if we find them, they're not breaking any laws by living off-grid. We can't force them to leave. But if they're involved in the disappearances, we have no evidence of that. Just suspicion and speculation. It was true. Everything we had was circumstantial. Changed markers, fast-growing moss, mysterious figures on trail cameras, and stories about forest people who might not even exist. But then, 3 days later, something happened that changed everything. A hiker came stumbling out of the forest at the Mirror Lake trailhead, dehydrated and disoriented. His name was Marcus Blake, and he'd been missing for 4 days. We'd had no report of him being missing. He was a solo hiker, no family nearby, no one who knew his plans. He'd simply been assumed to be somewhere else. Marcus was hospitalized for dehydration and exposure, but he recovered quickly. When he was stable enough to talk, I visited him at the hospital to get his statement. I thought I was going to die out there, he said, his voice still raspy. I couldn't find the trail. The markers kept changing. Changing how? I'd follow a blaze, and it would lead me to another blaze, and that one would point in a different direction. Sometimes I'd come back to the same junction, and the signs would say something different than they had an hour before. I thought I was losing my mind. Did you see anyone? Encounter anyone who might have been moving the markers? He hesitated. I saw people. At least I think they were people. Hard to tell in the fog and rain. They stayed just out of sight, always in the trees, but I could hear them. Footsteps, breathing, sometimes voices, whispering. What were they saying? I couldn't make it out, but I got the feeling they were hurting me, like they wanted me to go in a particular direction. Whenever I tried to go one way, I'd see movement that made me turn around. When I went the other way, the path would be clear. Where did they herd you to? A cabin, old, falling apart, deep in the woods. There was no trail leading to it, no sign anyone had been there in years. But inside there was food, Canned goods, water bottles, dried fruit. Fresh stuff, not decades old. My pulse quickened. Did you take any? I was starving. Yeah, I took some. Drank the water, ate some of the dried fruit. Then I passed out. When I woke up, I was back on the main trail, maybe half a mile from the trailhead. Like someone had carried me there while I slept. Someone carried you? I don't know how else I got there. The cabin was miles from the trail. I couldn't have walked that far in the state I was in. Someone moved me. I asked him to mark the location of the cabin on a map, but he couldn't. He said he'd been too disoriented, that everything had looked the same in the fog and rain, but he was certain the cabin existed. He'd been there. He'd eaten the food. We organized a search party to look for the cabin, using Marcus's best estimate of the location. 20 rangers and volunteers spent 2 days combing the forest in a grid pattern. We found nothing. No cabin, no old structures, no sign that anyone had been living deep in the woods. But we did find something else. In a small clearing about 2 miles off the Mirror Lake Trail, we found a circle of stones. In the center of the circle was a pile of items: hiking boots, water bottles, maps, energy bars, a cell phone. All of them worn but functional. All of them the kind of thing a hiker might carry. And all of them arranged in a careful display, like an offering or a memorial. Among the items was a blue hiking boot, women's size 8, Patricia's boot, the one she'd left on the trail with the note. We photographed everything, collected it all as evidence. The FBI took over the investigation again, running tests, checking for DNA, trying to identify the other items. The results were disturbing. The items belonged to at least 11 different people. 5 of them matched missing persons cases going back 15 years. The others were unknowns. 11 people. All of them had left or lost items in this clearing, and none of them had ever been found. This is a dump site, the FBI agent told me. Someone, or multiple someones, have been collecting items from hikers and depositing them here. The question is, are the hikers who lost these items still alive? We both knew the answer. They weren't. They couldn't be. This was a memorial. A trophy collection. Evidence of at least 11 deaths in the forest over the past 15 years. The FBI wanted to bring in cadaver dogs, conduct an extensive search of the area, but the Forest Service Administration blocked it. Too expensive, they said. Too disruptive to the ecosystem. The area would have to be closed to hikers during the search, and that would impact tourism revenue. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There are bodies out there, people who've been missing for years. Their families deserve to know. We don't know. There are bodies. My supervisor cut me off. All we have are some abandoned items. Could have been left by anyone for any reason. We're not shutting down prime hiking season based on speculation. This isn't speculation. This is evidence of multiple disappearances. Disappearances that might have happened anywhere. People hike all over these forests. There's no proof those items came from people who disappeared on our trails. It was a bureaucratic nightmare. The administration didn't want the bad publicity, didn't want the lawsuits, didn't want to admit that people had been vanishing from Forest Service land for years while they'd done nothing, so they buried it. Classified the findings as inconclusive. Removed the items, but closed the investigation. Jonas and I were ordered to stop pursuing the case. Focus on your regular duties, our supervisor said. The FBI is handling the investigation. Let them do their job. But the FBI wasn't doing anything. Without Forest Service cooperation, they couldn't conduct the searches they needed. The case stalled. That's when Jonas and I made a decision. We were going into the forest ourselves. Off duty, off the record. We were going to find that cabin Marcus had described. We were going to find whoever was living in the woods, and we were going to get answers. We spent a week preparing, studied topographic maps, looked for areas where a cabin could be hidden, gathered supplies, told no one our plans. If we disappeared, no one would know where to look, but we'd accepted that risk. On a Friday evening in late October, we parked at a remote trailhead and headed into the forest. We deliberately avoided the established trails, heading cross-country through some of the densest forest in the district. The going was slow. No trails meant navigating around fallen logs, through thick brush, across streams with no bridges. We marked our route carefully, GPS units constantly tracking, making sure we could find our way back. As night fell, we made camp in a small clearing. No fire. We didn't want to advertise our presence. We ate cold rations and settled in to wait. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving through the forest nearby. I nudged Jonas awake. We both listened, hardly breathing. The footsteps circled our camp. Slowly, methodically. Whatever was out there was checking us out, evaluating us. Then a voice. Barely a whisper, but close enough that I could make out the words. "They're looking for us." Another voice responded. "Let them look. They won't find anything." "These ones are different. Rangers? They know too much. Then we'll need to redirect them, like the others." The footsteps moved away, fading into the forest. Jonas and I looked at each other in the darkness. We'd just heard confirmation. There were people out here. They knew who we were, and they'd been watching us. "We should leave," Jonas whispered. "This is too dangerous." Part of me agreed, but part of me needed to know, needed to see. "One more day," I whispered back. "If we don't find anything tomorrow, we'll head back." As dawn broke, we broke camp and continued deeper into the forest. We found signs now, places where someone had passed through recently. Broken branches, disturbed moss, footprints in the mud, and then, around noon, we found it. The cabin. It was exactly as Marcus had described. Old, wooden, half-collapsed, hidden in a thick grove of trees. Moss covered the roof. Vines grew through the walls. It looked abandoned, like it had been standing there for decades. But when we approached the door, we could see it had been used recently. The door had been opened, the hinges showing wear. And inside was a living space. Sleeping bags, food supplies, water containers, a small camping stove, books, maps, and on the walls, photographs. Dozens of photographs. Some old, yellowed with age. Others more recent. All of them showing the same thing. The forest, the trails, the markers, and in many of them, people, hikers, some I recognized from missing persons reports. Others I'd never seen before. There was Patricia Reeves, photographed from a distance on the Mirror Lake Trail. There was Marcus Blake, captured on what must have been the second day of his wandering. There were at least 20 other people, all photographed without their knowledge. "Jesus Christ," Jonas breathed. "They've been watching everyone, documenting everyone who comes through." I pulled out my phone to photograph the evidence. But before I could take a picture, we heard a sound behind us. Footsteps. Multiple people. We turned to find 5 people standing in the doorway. 3 men, 2 women, aged anywhere from their 30s to their 70s, all wearing well-worn outdoor clothing, all looking at us with expressions that mixed anger and resignation. "You shouldn't have come here," one of the men said. He was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. "This place isn't for you." "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're the ones who remember. The ones who know the forest the way it should be known. The ones who try to protect it from people like you." Protect it by changing trail markers? By making people get lost? By showing them that they don't belong here? that some places aren't meant for tourists and their Instagram photos and their garbage and their noise. One of the women stepped forward. She was younger, maybe 40, with hard eyes. "You've been looking for the missing hikers. You want to know what happened to them?" "Yes. They're here, in the forest. They became part of it, the way all things eventually do. We didn't harm them, we just stopped trying to lead them out." My blood ran cold. "You let them die? You could have saved them, and you just let them wander until they—" "We tried to save them," the woman interrupted, her voice rising. "We left them food, water, supplies, but they wouldn't listen. They kept trying to follow the trails, the wrong trails, the trails that don't belong here. They couldn't accept that the forest was trying to tell them something. So yes, eventually they stopped wandering. The forest took them, as it will take all of us, eventually." "You're insane," Jonas said. The older man shook his head. "No, we're the only sane ones left. You think you can put trails wherever you want? You think you can bring thousands of people through sacred spaces and there won't be consequences? The forest fights back. It always has. We're just helping it along." I reached for my radio, but one of the other men grabbed my arm. "Don't. You can't keep us here. We're law enforcement officers. People know where we are." "No, they don't," the younger woman said. "You came off the record. You told no one. Just like all the others who came looking. You'll disappear too. Maybe they'll find your items in the clearing eventually. Maybe not. But either way, the forest will have you." They weren't wrong. We'd been stupid, arrogant. We'd thought we could handle this ourselves. But we'd brought one thing they didn't know about. A satellite beacon, already activated, already transmitting our location. I just had to keep them talking long enough for help to arrive. "Tell me about the moss," I said. "How does it grow so fast?" The older man smiled slightly. "You still think there's a rational explanation for everything. The moss grows because the forest wants it to grow. Because this place has power you can't measure in a laboratory. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get." We stood there in tense silence. I could see Jonas calculating distances, thinking about whether we could run. But we were surrounded. The cabin was miles from any established trail. Even if we got away, we'd probably just get lost in the forest ourselves. And then, faintly, I heard it. The sound of a helicopter. The forest people heard it too. Their expressions changed from confidence to alarm. "You brought help," the older man said, his voice tight with anger. "We're not stupid," I said. He looked at the others. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Then, to my surprise, they simply left, walked out of the cabin and into the forest. Within seconds, they'd vanished among the trees. Jonas and I ran outside, trying to see where they'd gone. But the forest had swallowed them completely. It was like they'd never been there. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, guided by our beacon. It carried a full tactical team, Forest Service law enforcement rangers in full gear, armed and ready for trouble. But there was no one to arrest, no one to detain. Just Jonas and me, standing in front of an old cabin in the middle of nowhere. We showed them the photographs, the supplies, the evidence of habitation. The team documented everything, photographed it all, bagged items for analysis. But when they tried to find the forest people, they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of passage. It was like the 5 people we'd seen had simply dissolved into the trees. The search continued for 3 days. They brought in dogs, thermal imaging, more personnel. They found the clearing with the stone circle. They found the abandoned cabin. They found evidence of at least 6 other campsites scattered through the remote areas, but they never found the people. The official conclusion was that there had been a group of squatters living illegally in the forest, that they'd fled when law enforcement arrived, and that they'd probably left the area entirely. I knew better. They were still out there, still watching, still waiting. The Mirror Lake Trail was closed indefinitely. The Forest Service finally admitted there were irregularities with the trail markers and that a full audit was being conducted. The families of the missing hikers were notified that remains might be located once a comprehensive search could be organized. Patricia Reeves's family held a memorial service. I attended, though I didn't know what to say. How do you tell someone that their loved one died because they trusted trail markers that had been deliberately altered? That people living in the forest had watched her get lost and done nothing? I didn't tell them any of that. I just said we'd done everything we could. Jonas requested a transfer. He's working in Arizona now, somewhere with no trees and no rain. He emails occasionally, brief messages asking if anything new has developed. I always tell him no, but that's not quite true. I still hike the Mount Hood trails. I know I probably shouldn't, but I can't seem to stay away. And sometimes, when I'm deep in the forest, I feel watched. I see movement just out of the corner of my eye. I find markers that have been moved overnight, despite our increased maintenance schedule. And once, just once, I found a note pinned to a tree along a trail I was inspecting. It was written on bark, the letters carved deep. "We are still here. The forest remembers some paths should not be walked." I removed the note, filed a report. But I kept a photo of it, because I think they're right. Some paths should not be walked. Some places in the forest aren't meant for us. And no matter how many trails we cut, how many markers we place, how many maps we draw, the forest will always push back. The moss will grow. The markers will move. And people who don't listen, who don't understand, who insist on following the paths we've made instead of the paths the forest wants, those people will disappear. The forest is patient, the forest is vast, and the forest ultimately always wins. I'm writing this as a warning. If you hike the Pacific Northwest, if you walk the old growth forests where the rain never stops and the moss covers everything, pay attention. Trust your instincts. And if the trail markers seem wrong, if the moss is too thick, if you feel watched, turn back. Some paths lead where you expect. Others lead nowhere at all. And in the deep forest where the moss grows thick and the ancient trees remember everything, those are the paths you'll find yourself walking, whether you want to or not. My name is Lena Norwood, and I've been a ranger in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest in southern Washington for 9 years. 9 years of thinking I understood these woods. I was wrong. The Gifford Pinchot covers nearly 1.4 million acres of temperate rainforest. We get over 140 inches of rain a year. The trees, Douglas fir, western hemlock, western red cedar, grow over 250 feet tall, and the canopy is so dense that entire sections exist in perpetual twilight. In a forest this vast and ancient, there are anomalies, things that are real, documented, photographed, and completely impossible to explain. Eli Grant joined our station in early November, transferring from Oregon with 15 years of experience. We were partnered immediately. The station was short-staffed, and we were heading into the wet season when search and rescue calls would spike. Our first assignment together was a routine boundary survey near Dark Meadow. The area had been logged in the 1970s, then left to regenerate. We needed to locate boundary markers, document them, and replace any damaged ones. We started at dawn on a Tuesday. Light rain, 40 degrees. Standard November weather. About an hour in, Eli said, "This area's quiet, no bird calls." He was right, the forest was unnaturally silent. We continued walking, marking our route, documenting the boundary. Around 11 a.m., we reached a section where the forest became notably denser. The trees here were younger, maybe 30 years old instead of 50, growing so close together that we had to turn sideways to slip between them. "This doesn't match the survey notes," Eli said, checking the paperwork. "Says here, this section should be mature secondary growth, 8 to 12-inch diameter trees. These are barely 6 inches. I looked around. He was right. The trees were too young, too tightly packed. It was like this section had been replanted a full 20 years after the rest of the area. "Maybe there was a fire we don't know about," I suggested. "Killed the original growth and this is third generation." "Maybe, but there's no record of it." We pushed through the dense stand, branches scraping against our rain gear. It was slow going. The underbrush was thick with salal and ferns, and several times we had to backtrack around impassable thickets. That's when Eli stopped suddenly. "Lena, look at this." I pushed through the last few trees and stopped beside him. We'd emerged into a clearing, but not a natural clearing. The trees formed a perfect semicircle, creating an open space maybe 30 feet across. The trees at the edge were all bent inward, their trunks curving toward the center of the clearing at impossible angles. Some of them were nearly horizontal for the first 10 feet before curving back upward to reach for the sky. It looked like something out of a fantasy illustration. Trees don't grow like that. They can bend around obstacles or grow at angles on slopes, but this was different. This was deliberate, intentional. "What the hell?" I breathed. Eli was already walking the perimeter, examining the trees. "This isn't natural. Trees don't form perfect semicircles. And look at how they're bent. That's not wind damage or snow load. That's impossible," I finished. But it was right there in front of us. Real. Solid. Impossible to deny. The clearing itself was strange, too. The ground was bare dirt, no vegetation at all. No grass, no moss, no ferns. Just packed earth that looked almost deliberately cleared. I pulled out my camera and started taking photos. Wide shots of the full semicircle, close-ups of individual bent trees, the bare ground, the way the trees curved. "We need to document this," I said. "GPS coordinates, measurements, everything." Eli pulled out the GPS unit and frowned at the screen. "The coordinates are the same as the last waypoint we marked." "That can't be right." He reset it. Same coordinates. Walked to different parts of the clearing. Same coordinates everywhere. I checked my phone's GPS. Same numbers. "Equipment malfunction?" I suggested. 2 different units showing the same error. Maybe there's mineral deposits interfering with the satellite signal. "Let's document what we can without GPS," I said. "We can come back with better equipment, maybe a surveying crew." We spent the next hour documenting everything with photos, measurements, and sketches. Eli collected soil samples. I documented the tree species, all Douglas fir, same age except for their bizarre growth. While we worked, I felt watched, like the forest was aware of us, waiting. Around 1 p.m., we headed back. We marked the location with orange flagging tape, then retraced our steps. The walk back was uneventful. GPS worked fine now. By 3 p.m., we were at the truck. "I'll write this up tonight," Eli said. "The regional office will want to know about this." Back at the station, I downloaded the photos. They looked even more surreal on screen. Then I noticed something in one shot. A dark shape in the background. Person-shaped. Standing in the trees, watching. I checked other photos. The same figure appeared in 3 of them, always at the edge of the dense trees, always watching. "Eli," I called, "come look at this." He came over, and I showed him the images. He studied them carefully. "Could be a trick of light and shadow," he said. "The trees are so dense in that area, lots of dark spaces between trunks. pareidolia, seeing faces or figures in random patterns. In 3 different photos? From different angles? Maybe. Or maybe someone else was out there, hiker, hunter, another ranger. Did you see anyone? No. Did you? No. But we were focused on the clearing. Someone could have been watching from the trees and we wouldn't have noticed. It was possible, but something about the figure in the photos bothered me. The way it appeared in the same relative position in each shot, like it was following us around the perimeter of the clearing, and the way it was always perfectly still, never moving between shots. "I'm putting these in the report too," Eli said. "Even if it's just shadows, better to document everything." I went home that night but couldn't stop thinking about the clearing, the bent trees, the GPS anomaly, the figure in the photos. None of it made sense, and my brain kept trying to find patterns, explanations, rational answers. I dreamed about it. In the dream, I was standing in the clearing again, but it was different. The trees were moving, slowly bending further inward, closing the semicircle. And in the center of the closing space stood a figure, dark and indistinct, watching me with eyes I couldn't see. I woke up at 3 a.m., my heart pounding. Just a dream. Just my mind processing a strange experience. I tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't. Finally, at 5, I gave up and got ready for work early. I was at the station by 6:30, surprised to find Eli already there. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Not really. You?" "Same. Kept thinking about that clearing. I did some research last night. Looked through old survey records, historical photos, logging reports. You know what I found?" "What?" "Nothing. No mention of that area at all. The surveys show the forest as continuous secondary growth. No clearings. No anomalies. It's like that semicircle doesn't exist in any official record." "That's impossible. We were there. We have photos." "I know. But according to every map and survey of that area going back to 1975, there's nothing there. Just forest." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we should go back. Verify what we saw. Make sure it's real and not some, I don't know, some shared hallucination caused by carbon monoxide or spores or something." "Shared hallucination?" I'm grasping at straws here, Lena, but 2 different GPS units showing the same wrong coordinates, a clearing that doesn't appear in any records. It's strange enough that I want to verify our data before I submit this report. He was right. If we reported something this anomalous, we needed to be absolutely certain of what we'd seen. "Okay," I said. "Let's go back today. Bring better equipment, more cameras, maybe a compass to check for magnetic anomalies." We gathered better equipment and returned that Saturday. 3 GPS units, 2 cameras, a compass, magnetic field detector, and a satellite communicator with SOS beacon. We reached the entrance to the dense stand by 8 a.m. The orange flagging tape was still there. But as we pushed through, something was wrong. The forest was denser, trees packed tighter. We had to force our way through. According to GPS, we were following our exact track from before. But it didn't feel right. Finally, we reached where the clearing should have been. It wasn't there, just dense forest. No semicircle, no bent trunks, no bare ground. "This can't be right," Eli said, checking coordinates. "We're at the exact location." I pulled out my phone, showed him yesterday's photos. The clearing was real in the images, but here now there was nothing, just uninterrupted forest. We searched for 2 hours, expanding our radius, rechecking coordinates, nothing. The clearing was gone. At the station, Eli discovered his soil samples were gone. The sealed evidence bags were empty. Not torn, just empty. The soil had vanished. I checked my camera's metadata. The photos showed they were taken today, not yesterday, despite the camera never leaving my bag. "We need to report this," I said. "Report what? That we found a clearing that doesn't exist? They'll think we're crazy." Something happened. Something we don't understand. Something impossible. We decided not to file an official report. Not yet. Not until we could figure out what we'd actually experienced. Instead, Eli and I agreed to keep investigating on our own time. No official patrols. No logging our trips. Just the two of us trying to understand what had happened. Over the next week, we researched obsessively. I found that the Dark Meadow area had unusually high magnetite concentrations, iron oxide that could interfere with compasses, though not GPS. Eli found incident reports going back to the 1980s, hikers lost on trails they knew. Search and rescue, finding people miles from where they should be. And 3 separate reports from rangers who had documented impossible forest formations, clearings that shouldn't exist, trees in geometric patterns, forest sections that changed between visits. None had been investigated. All were filed and forgotten. "Look at this," Eli said, showing me a '93 report. Ranger Thomas Keene found a circle of bent trees, took photos, marked the location. When he returned 3 days later, the circle was gone. He transferred 2 weeks later. We found a pattern. Over 40 years, at least a dozen rangers or hikers had reported anomalous formations in the Gifford Pinchot. Most who reported them either transferred away or quit the Forest Service. "You think our supervisors know about this?" Eli shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe they've seen it themselves and decided it's better not to ask questions. Maybe they've tried to investigate and gotten nowhere. Or maybe they think we're all just seeing things that aren't there. But we have photos. Photos that the camera thinks were taken on the wrong day. Photos with mysterious figures in the background. Photos of something that apparently doesn't exist anymore." I looked at the images again. The semicircle of bent trees was so clear, so real. But when I zoomed in on the dark figure in the background, I noticed something I'd missed before. In each photo, where the figure appeared, the trees behind it were slightly different. Not different species or different sizes, but in different positions, like the forest itself was shifting between shots. I pointed this out to Eli. He studied the images carefully. "You're right," he said quietly. "Look at this tree here." He pointed to a distinctive curved trunk in one photo. In this shot, it's about 10 feet to the left of the figure. But in this photo, taken from a different angle, it's directly behind the figure. The tree moved, or the figure moved, or the whole forest moved, I finished. It sounded insane. Forests don't move. Trees stay rooted. Physics don't allow for solid objects to shift positions based on the angle you observe them from. But the evidence was right there in the photos. "We need to go back," Eli said. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No. But we need to know. We need to understand what's happening." I thought about the reports of other rangers who'd investigated these anomalies. How many of them had gone back for a second look? How many had found what they were looking for? And how many had simply disappeared into the forest, becoming part of the very anomaly they were trying to understand? "If we go back," I said, "we do it smart. We bring communication equipment. We tell someone where we're going and when we'll be back. We set a hard turnaround time, and if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately." Agreed. We planned the trip for the following Saturday. That gave us a week to prepare, to gather better equipment, and to set up safety protocols. We told our supervisor we were doing a personal backpacking trip in the Goat Rocks wilderness, far from where we were actually going, but plausible enough that no one would question it. We also made a decision. We'd bring video cameras this time, continuously recording everything. If the clearing existed one moment and disappeared the next, we'd have video evidence of the transition. The week passed slowly. I found myself growing increasingly anxious about the return trip. My dreams were filled with bent trees and shifting forests. Several times I woke up convinced I could hear trees moving outside my window, their roots pulling free from the soil and repositioning themselves in new configurations. I knew it was just stress, just my mind processing the inexplicable. But the dreams felt real enough that I started avoiding windows, avoiding looking at the forest that surrounded my cabin. Eli seemed to be handling it better, or at least he was better at hiding his anxiety. He threw himself into preparation, testing equipment, planning routes, studying maps. He printed out historical photos of the area, looking for any changes in the forest configuration over the decades. "Look at this," he said, showing me satellite images from different years. "This is the Dark Meadow area in 2005, and this is 2015, and this is 2023. I looked at the images. At first glance, they appeared identical. Dense forest, no clearings, no visible anomalies. But when he overlaid them digitally, I could see subtle differences. Trees appeared to be in slightly different positions. Small gaps in the canopy would appear in one image and disappear in the next. The overall pattern of the forest seemed to shift, like a slow-motion kaleidoscope rearranging itself over decades. "Satellite imagery doesn't lie," Eli said. "The forest is changing configuration. Slowly, over years, but it's changing. Trees are moving. Trees don't move. Then explain these images." I couldn't. There was no rational explanation for what we were seeing. Trees grow. They fall, they rot, and new ones replace them. But they don't shift positions over time. They don't rearrange themselves like chess pieces on a board. Saturday arrived cold and clear. For once, it wasn't raining. The temperature was in the low 40s, and the sky was that brilliant blue you only see in the Pacific Northwest after a storm system clears. We met at the trailhead at 7 a.m., both of us loaded with gear. 2 video cameras, continuously recording. 3 GPS units, a compass, the magnetic field detector, extra batteries, emergency supplies, and a satellite communicator with an SOS beacon just in case. We'd also prepared a detailed itinerary and left it with a friend of mine who lived in Portland. If we didn't check in by 6 p.m., she'd call search and rescue. "Ready?" Eli asked. "As I'll ever be." We started hiking. The forest was beautiful in the morning light, the moss-covered trunks glowing green, the filtered sunlight creating cathedral-like spaces beneath the canopy. It was hard to believe that something sinister could exist in a place this beautiful. We reached the boundary line without incident. Our old tracks had been washed away by a week of rain, but we followed our GPS coordinates from the previous trips. The forest seemed normal. Birds called in the canopy. A squirrel chattered at us from a branch. Everything was as it should be. When we reached the entrance to the dense stand of trees, marked by the orange flagging tape we'd left, we stopped. "Video cameras recording?" I asked. Eli checked his. "Yes, yours?" I verified. "Recording." "GPS units?" We both checked. All 3 were working, showing our correct position. "Okay," Eli said. "Let's do this." We pushed into the dense stand. Immediately, I felt the change. The air became cooler, the birdsong stopped. The quality of light shifted, becoming dimmer despite the clear sky above. And the trees were different again. They were even more tightly packed than on our second trip. We had to force our way between trunks, sometimes having to backtrack and find alternate routes. The young Douglas firs pressed in from all sides, their branches catching at our clothes and gear. I kept checking the video camera, making sure it was recording. The small screen showed what I was seeing: dense trees, narrow gaps, the constant struggle to move forward. We'd been pushing through for about 20 minutes when Eli stopped. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, there was nothing but our breathing and the rustle of our movements through the branches. Then I heard it, a sound like wind in the trees. But there was no wind. The air was completely still. The sound grew louder, a creaking, groaning noise, like massive wooden structures under stress, and beneath that, something else, a rustling, shifting sound that seemed to come from all around us. "The trees are moving," Eli whispered. I looked at the nearest trunk. At first, I saw nothing. Then, gradually, I noticed it. The tree was swaying, not like wind was blowing it, but like it was moving of its own accord. Shifting position, the roots beneath the soil pulling up and resettling, moving the trunk inches to the left. And all around us, other trees were doing the same thing. Slowly, incrementally, but definitely moving. The forest was rearranging itself while we stood in it. "We should leave," I said. "Not yet. Look." He pointed ahead. Through the moving trees, I could see a break in the forest. Light filtering through from a clearing. "It's there," Eli said. "The clearing. It's real." We pushed forward, the trees seeming to resist our passage, branches catching and holding, trunks closing gaps we'd just passed through. But we made progress, and finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes, we emerged into the clearing. It was exactly as we'd found it before: the semicircle of bent trees, the bare ground, the impossible geometry. But now, in daylight, I could see details I'd missed on our first visit. The bare ground wasn't just dirt. It was covered in a pattern. Lines scored into the earth, forming a design I didn't recognize. Geometric shapes interlocking, spirals and straight edges combining into something that hurt to look at, like an optical illusion that your brain couldn't quite process. "Are you recording this?" I asked Eli. He held up his camera. "Every second." I did the same, filming the bent trees, the pattern on the ground, the way the light filtered through the canopy above. The clearing was exactly as we'd found it, down to the smallest detail. Except for one thing. The dark figure we'd seen in the background of our first photos was here now, not in the trees, in the clearing. It stood at the far edge of the semicircle, perfectly still. It was person-shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. The proportions were off in ways I couldn't quite articulate. "Eli," I said quietly, "do you see that?" "I see it." The figure didn't move, didn't react to our presence. It just stood there, watching us with eyes we couldn't see from this distance. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The figure remained motionless. Eli checked his GPS. Same problem as before. All 3 units are showing the same coordinates as our last waypoint, over a mile back. I checked mine. He was right. Despite being in a completely different location, the GPS insisted we hadn't moved. "What is this place?" I whispered. Eli was examining the bent trees more closely. "Look at this. The way they're curved, it's not natural growth. Something forced them to grow this way. Something bent them when they were saplings and held them in position until the wood set. And that would take years. Decades, maybe." "I know. But look at the growth rings." He was examining a spot where the bark had peeled away. "These trees are only about 30 years old, but the bending would have had to start when they were very young, maybe 5 or 10 years old, which means someone has been maintaining this clearing for at least 20 years. But it wasn't here on our second visit. The clearing was gone. Maybe it's always been here, but only visible at certain times, or from certain angles, or under certain conditions. The figure at the far edge of the clearing moved. Just a slight shift in position, but it was definitely closer than it had been a moment ago. "We should leave," I said. "Wait, I want to try something." Eli pulled out the compass. "If there's magnetic interference, the compass should—" The needle spun wildly, rotating in full circles, unable to find north. "Okay," Eli said. "That's not normal." The figure moved again. Closer still. It was perhaps 20 feet away now. In the clearer light, I could see more details. It was wearing clothing, or something like clothing, dark and ragged, hanging from its impossibly thin frame. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." But when I turned to go back the way we'd come, the entrance to the clearing was gone. The trees had closed in, forming a solid wall of trunks. The gap we'd emerged from no longer existed. "Eli," I said, my voice tight, "we have a problem." He turned and saw what I was seeing. "That's impossible. We just came through there." The figure was closer now, 10 feet away. I could see its face, or the absence of face. Where features should be, there was just shadow, a darkness that seemed to absorb light. I pulled out the satellite communicator and hit the SOS button. A red light started flashing, indicating it was transmitting our distress signal, except the coordinates it was transmitting were wrong. It was broadcasting the same impossible coordinates our GPS units were showing. The figure extended something that might have been an arm, pointing, not at us, but at the pattern on the ground, the scored lines in the bare earth. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, what this place was. It wasn't a clearing, it was a door. The pattern on the ground was a threshold, a boundary between what was and what shouldn't be. And we were standing right in the middle of it. "Walk backwards," I said to Eli. "Slowly. Don't take your eyes off that thing." We started backing up, moving toward where the entrance should be. The figure didn't follow, but it didn't need to. The trees were moving again, closing in, the semicircle becoming a full circle, trapping us in the center. I kept the video camera running, documenting everything. If we didn't make it out, at least there would be evidence, proof of what we'd seen. The trees were nearly closed now, leaving only a small gap. Eli and I squeezed through, forcing our way between trunks that seemed to actively resist our passage. Branches caught at our clothes, our gear, our skin. And then we were through, stumbling into the dense forest beyond the clearing. I turned back, expecting to see the figure following us. But the clearing was gone again. Just solid forest, trees packed so tightly that we couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. "Run," Eli said. We ran, crashing through underbrush, forcing our way between trees, not caring about the noise we made or the damage to our equipment. We just needed to get away from that place. I don't know how long we ran. Time felt wrong, elastic. But eventually we burst out of the dense stand and onto the boundary line we'd been following. The forest here was normal. Regular spacing, normal trees. We kept moving, not stopping until we reached the truck. Only then did I check the video camera. The footage was there, all of it. The dense forest, the clearing, the bent trees, the pattern on the ground, and the figure, standing at the edge of the semicircle, watching us, moving closer with each second of footage. But there was something else in the video, something I hadn't seen while we were there. In the background, barely visible through the bent trees, were more figures, dozens of them, standing in the forest beyond the clearing, all watching, all waiting. "Eli," I said, "look at this." He watched the footage over my shoulder. His face went pale. "Those weren't there when we were filming." "I know. But they're on the video." "I know." We drove back to the station in silence. What was there to say? We had proof now. Video evidence of something impossible. But what were we supposed to do with it? That night, I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the clearing, the bent trees, the figure with no face, the dozens of watchers in the background. And I kept thinking about what Eli had said, that the clearing was maintained, that someone had bent those trees decades ago and kept them bent, which meant someone or something had been living in that forest for at least 20 years. Maintaining the clearing, keeping the threshold open, but open to what? And more importantly, now that we'd been there, now that we'd crossed that threshold and come back, what had we brought back with us? I called in sick on Monday. So did Eli. We needed time to process what we'd experienced, and we needed to decide what to do with the evidence. We met at a coffee shop in Trout Lake, a small town about 30 miles from the station. Neutral ground. A public place where we could talk without worrying about being overheard by other rangers. I've watched the footage probably 50 times, Eli said. He looked like he hadn't slept. Every time I see something new. More figures in the background, the trees moving in ways trees shouldn't move, and that thing, that figure in the clearing, I swear it's different in every frame. Like it's not quite solid, like it's shifting. I noticed that too, I said. Frame by frame, it's in slightly different positions. Not walking, just existing in multiple positions simultaneously. That's not possible. Nothing about this is possible, but we have it on video. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us staring at our coffee. Finally, Eli spoke. We need to report this. Show the footage to someone who can explain it. A physicist, maybe. Or someone who studies anomalous phenomena. Who? The Forest Service is going to think we faked it. And if we go public, we'll be laughed out of our jobs. Maybe. But we can't just sit on this. Other people are going to go into that forest. They might find the clearing. They might not come back. He was right. We had a responsibility to warn people, even if it cost us our credibility. Okay, I said, but we need to be smart about it. We document everything. We get our facts straight, and we find someone who will actually listen. Over the next week, we compiled our evidence. All the photos from both visits. All the video footage. The GPS anomaly data. The historical reports we'd found. The satellite imagery showing the forest changing configuration. Everything. We also did something else. We checked the missing persons reports for the Gifford Pinchot over the past 40 years. What we found was chilling. 63 people had gone missing in the National Forest since 1980. 63. Most were eventually found. Injured, lost, or deceased from exposure. But 13 were never found. No bodies, no belongings, no trace. And when we plotted the locations where these 13 people were last seen, a pattern emerged. All of them had disappeared within a 5-mile radius of dark meadow. All of them had been experienced hikers. And all of them had vanished during clear weather, in daylight, on well-marked trails. This is beyond anomaly, Eli said. This is a pattern. People are disappearing in that area, and it's been happening for decades. We brought our findings to our station supervisor, a man named Richard Kowalski, who'd been with the Forest Service for 30 years. We showed him everything. The photos, the video, the missing persons data. He listened patiently, watched the footage without comment, and studied the data we'd compiled. When we finished, he sat back in his chair and sighed. I was hoping I'd retire before this came up again, he said. Eli and I exchanged glances. You know about this? Know about it? I've seen it. Back in '94, when I was a new ranger. Found a clearing that shouldn't have existed. Circle of trees all bent inward. I reported it just like you're doing now. You know what happened? What? They sent an investigation team, 5 rangers, a geologist, and a surveying crew. They went in with the best equipment we had at the time. 3 of them came back. 2 didn't. What happened to the ones who didn't come back? Officially, lost in the wilderness. Presumed dead from exposure. Unofficially, he shrugged. They're still out there. Somewhere in that forest. The 3 who came back wouldn't talk about what they saw. All 3 requested transfers within a month. 2 of them left the Forest Service entirely. And nobody investigated further? They tried, brought in more teams. But they could never find the clearing again. It was gone, just like yours. Eventually, they gave up. Chalked it up to natural phenomena we didn't understand. Put a quiet notice out to rangers in the area to avoid that section of forest if possible. That's it? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. People disappeared, and the Forest Service just gave up? What else were they supposed to do? They searched, they looked for evidence. But how do you investigate something that doesn't stay in one place? How do you explain GPS anomalies and moving trees without sounding insane? We have video now, Eli said. Technology has advanced. We can prove. Prove what? Kowalski interrupted. That the forest does impossible things. That there are places in these woods where physics doesn't work the way it should. People don't want to hear that. They want rational explanations. They want to believe the world makes sense. But it doesn't, I said. Not always. Not in that clearing. Kowalski pulled out a file from his desk drawer. It was old, yellowed, marked Confidential Dark Meadow Incident before. I kept this, he said. Against regulations, but I kept it. Because I knew someday someone else would find that place. Someone else would see what I saw. And they'd need to know they weren't crazy. He opened the file and pulled out photographs. They showed a clearing with a full circle of bent trees. In the center stood a figure, dark and indistinct. In the background, barely visible, were more figures. The photos could have been from our trip. They were that similar. Same place? I asked. I think so, but the configuration was different. Full circle instead of semicircle. And the pattern on the ground was different too. Same general design but rotated, like it had moved or changed somehow. What do you think it is? Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I've spent 29 years trying not to think about it. But if I had to guess, I'd say there are places in old-growth forests, places that have never been logged or developed, places that have been undisturbed for thousands of years, that don't quite follow the same rules as the rest of the world. That's not a scientific explanation. No, it's not. But sometimes science doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes there are phenomena we can observe but can't explain, and maybe, just maybe, we're not meant to explain them. Maybe we're just supposed to accept that they exist and stay the hell away. What about the people who disappeared? Eli asked. Don't we owe it to their families to investigate? Investigate how? We've tried. Every time someone finds that clearing, we try. But it's like the forest doesn't want to be understood. It shows you enough to know something's wrong, then it hides again. And anyone who pushes too hard, he gestured at the file, they don't come back. I thought about the figures we'd seen in the video, the watchers in the trees. You think they're still alive? The people who disappeared? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe they found something in that clearing that changed them. Maybe they couldn't come back. Or maybe they chose not to. It was a disturbing thought. That people who encountered the clearing didn't disappear. They stayed. Became part of whatever that place was. So, what do? I asked. You write your report, document everything. I'll add it to the file, and then you forget about it. You don't go back to that area. You don't investigate further. You move on with your lives. Just like that. Just like that. Because the alternative is ending up like those two rangers in '94. Still out there, still wandering, still trying to understand something that can't be understood. We left Kowalski's office with more questions than answers. We'd confirmed that we weren't crazy, that other people had experienced the same phenomena, but we were no closer to understanding what the clearing actually was or why it existed. That night, I reviewed the video footage one more time, frame by frame, looking for any detail I might have missed. And I found something that made my blood run cold. In the final seconds of footage, as we were running away from the clearing, the camera had caught something, a brief glimpse, less than a second, of what was beyond the bent trees. It wasn't more forest. It was something else, a space that didn't quite look right, too dark, too vast, with things moving in that darkness, shapes that might have been trees but probably weren't, and standing at the threshold, watching us run, was a figure I recognized. Not the faceless thing from the clearing. This was a person. A man wearing a Forest Service uniform. Old style, like from the '90s. I zoomed in on the image. It was grainy, but I could make out a name tag. Keene. T. Thomas Keene. The ranger who'd reported finding a circle of bent trees in '93. The ranger who'd transferred to Montana shortly after. Except according to the figure in the video, he'd never left the forest at all. I called Eli immediately. "You need to see this." He came over, and I showed him the frame. His face went pale. "That's impossible." Keene transferred. He worked in Montana for 15 years before retiring. Did he? Or did something else happen? Did whatever we saw in that clearing replace him? Send something back that looked like him but wasn't? That's crazy. Look at the video, Eli. That's a Forest Service uniform from the '90s. That's Keene's name on the badge. And he's standing on the wrong side of the threshold in that dark space beyond the trees. We sat in silence, both of us trying to process the implications. If Keene hadn't really transferred, if something else had taken his place and lived his life for the past 30 years, then what had happened to the real Thomas Keene? And more importantly, were we next? Over the following weeks, I became increasingly paranoid. I started seeing movement in the trees outside my cabin, hearing sounds that didn't belong. I'd wake up convinced that the clearing had followed me home, that my walls were bending like trees, that figures stood in my bedroom watching me sleep. Eli was experiencing similar things. He moved out of his cabin and into a hotel in town. Said he couldn't stand being near the forest anymore. We both considered quitting, taking Kowalski's advice and just walking away from the whole thing. But something kept us investigating. Maybe it was professional obligation. Maybe it was the need to understand. Or maybe something from the clearing had gotten into our heads and wouldn't let go. We started cataloging other anomalous reports from across the Pacific Northwest. And we found that Dark Meadow wasn't unique. There were at least 15 other locations in Washington and Oregon where similar phenomena had been reported. Clearings that appeared and disappeared, GPS failures, missing persons, trees that moved, all of them in old-growth forests, all of them in areas that had never been logged or significantly developed, all of them in places that had been undisturbed for hundreds or thousands of years. "It's like the forest is protecting itself," Eli said one evening as we reviewed the data. "Creating these traps or barriers or whatever they are, keeping people out of the deepest, oldest parts. But why? What's in there that needs protecting? Maybe it's not about protecting what's in there. Maybe it's about protecting us from what's in there." It was a disturbing thought, that these clearings, these impossible places, were actually warnings. Stay out. Don't go deeper. Turn back while you still can. And we'd ignored the warning. We'd pushed through. We'd crossed the threshold. What had we seen on the other side? What was in that dark space beyond the bent trees? I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, 3 months after our encounter with the clearing, I made a decision. I requested a transfer to a station in eastern Washington on the dry side of the Cascades, far from the rainforest, far from the old growth, far from places where trees bent in impossible ways and clearings appeared and disappeared. Eli did the same. He transferred to Idaho. We promised to stay in touch, to keep sharing information if we found anything new. But I think we both knew we were just trying to run away from something we couldn't escape. Because the truth is, once you've seen those places, once you've crossed those thresholds, you carry them with you. They're in your memory, in your dreams, in the way you look at forests and wonder what's really out there, hiding in the spaces between the trees. My last day at the Gifford Pinchot station was in early March. Kowalski took me aside before I left. "You did the right thing," he said. "Getting out. Some rangers spend their whole careers trying to understand places like Dark Meadow. It never ends well. What happened to the other 3, the ones who came back from the '94 investigation? 2 died. Car accidents, both of them within 5 years. The third," he hesitated. "She's in a psychiatric facility in Seattle. Has been for 20 years. Says she can still see the clearing. Says it follows her wherever she goes." Jesus. Yeah. So take my advice, Lena. Forget about it. Live your life. Don't look for patterns in the forest. Don't investigate strange clearings. And for God's sake, don't go back. I promised him I wouldn't. But I knew I was lying, because the clearing is still there, still existing in that fold of reality where physics stops making sense and trees bend in impossible ways. And someday, someone else will find it. Someone else will take photos and videos. Someone else will try to understand. And maybe, just maybe, they won't come back. I've been at my new station for 6 months now. The forest here is different. Ponderosa pine instead of Douglas fir. Dry instead of wet. Open meadows instead of dense undergrowth. It should feel safer. But I still see movement in the trees sometimes. Still hear sounds that don't belong. And twice I've found clearings in the forest that didn't appear on any map. Small ones. Just a few trees bent in odd ways. I haven't investigated them. I've taken Kowalski's advice. I've walked away. But I know they're there. And I know that somewhere in the old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, the real clearings still exist. The thresholds, the doors to places we're not meant to see. And I know that the figures are still there, standing at the edges, watching and waiting. Patient as only the forest can be patient. Waiting for someone else to cross the threshold. Waiting to add another person to the list of those who disappeared into the trees and never came back. I'm writing this as a record, as evidence for whoever comes after, because I know someone will investigate those clearings eventually. Someone will see the bent trees and think they've found something interesting, something worth documenting. When they do, I want them to know what they're really looking at. Not a natural phenomenon, not a magnetic anomaly, but something older and stranger than we have words for. A door, a threshold, a place where the forest remembers what it was before humans came with their roads and trails and GPS units. Before we mapped every square mile and thought we understood it all. The forest remembers. And in certain places, under certain conditions, it shows you what it remembers. And God help you if you're standing in the wrong place when it does, because clearings don't just appear and disappear. They move, they shift, they exist in multiple places simultaneously. and if you're not careful, you might find yourself in one without meaning to. You might find yourself standing on bare ground, surrounded by bent trees, with figures watching from the darkness beyond. And you might discover, as I did, that there's no going back. Not really. Because once you've crossed that threshold, once you've seen what's on the other side, part of you stays there. Forever. In the clearing, in the place between, where the trees close in and the GPS stops working and time itself becomes uncertain. I still have the videos. I still have the photos. They're on a hard drive in a safety deposit box in Seattle. Someday, someone might find them, might watch them, might see what we saw. But I hope they don't try to find the clearing. I hope they take my warning seriously. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some forests never forgive those who trespass in their deepest, oldest places. The clearing is still there. I know it is. It's waiting, always waiting. And someday I know I'll go back. Not because I want to, but because it's calling. In my dreams, I stand in the clearing. The bent trees sway without wind. The figures watch from the shadows, and the pattern on the ground glows with a light that shouldn't exist. And I know, with absolute certainty, that I'm home. That's the most terrifying part. Not that the clearing exists, not that it defies explanation, but that some part of me, some deep part that I can't control, wants to go back, wants to cross that threshold again, wants to see what's beyond the bent trees, wants to join the watchers in the shadows and become part of the forest's memory. Forever. I fight it every day, but I can feel it growing stronger. The pull, the call, the certainty that I belong there in that impossible place more than I belong anywhere in the world I know. So if you're reading this, if you found these files, know this. I tried to resist. I tried to stay away. But the clearing doesn't let go. Once you've been there, you're marked, changed. Part of you stays in that place between, and sooner or later, the rest of you follows. I'm going back, not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when I do, I won't be coming back. This is Ranger Lena Norwood, signing off. The trees are calling, and this time I'm going to answer.